After what felt like forever, the carriage finally pulled up to the fortress. The guy inside told them to open the gates, saying he'd brought her. The main character peeked out the window, and her bright pink eyes instantly widened with amazement and surprise at the massive fortress she saw. They immediately opened the gates to the Phoenix Dukedom fortress. She'd heard that it was always winter up north, but inside the estate, despite the intense cold, it was surprisingly green, and Yuna was even taken aback by the power of the magic stones. Her uncle told her that this was her new home now. From today on, she was the Archduke's wife. As soon as Yuna stepped out of the carriage, the maids who were there to greet her started whispering to each other, not even trying to hide it. Her uncle's hand landed on his niece's shoulder. He explained that northerners can be pretty frosty towards outsiders. Back on Rue Island, where our girl's from, they didn't really have the whole nation thing, but she'd do anything for her people. She pulled back her hood and introduced herself with a smile. The maids were instantly blown away by how gorgeous she was. Suddenly, a guy's voice right next to them was all, "Is this supposed to be my wife?" And everyone immediately snapped to attention at the sight of his lordship. Lord Theo de Phoenix, covered in blood, explained he was just back from a hunt. He held out his blood-soaked hand to the young woman. As soon as the guy introduced himself, our heroine shyly shook his hand, which was surprisingly warm and huge. It's just that the dude's tone was kinda icy, but Yuna didn't even seem to notice. So, out of nowhere, the Lord drops the bomb. No official wedding ceremony. Yeah, the main girl was pretty surprised. Theo spills that he's been married 3 times already, and each wife is either on the run or pushing up daisies. A little later, the Lord's secretary showed her where she'd be staying. Separate rooms from Theo. Yulis says to think of it as a chance to ease into things around here. Only catch? The girl's room was in the tower's attic, and all the other floors were totally empty. The main girl was like, pleasantly shocked and stoked at the same time. Couldn't believe she'd be living in a place like this all by herself. Lord Phoenix was knocking back drinks in his study. Yulis shows up and reports that he put the girl in the North Tower. But what he really wanted to know was why the boss was covered in blood, since there was no hunting trip, right? Theo explained it was some kind of warning. He made it clear to her that marital bliss was off the table. Now she'd be quiet as a mouse, holed up in her dusty attic. And after hearing that, Yulis decided to call David. With a smirk, the Lord asked if she cried when she found out about the attic. But the advisors said she was smiling. Theo's eyes went wide, and he stopped drinking, because that was the last thing he expected to hear from Yulis. The main character was thrilled. She was happy to have so much personal space. Plus, thanks to the magic stones, the room was pretty warm, and she even warmed her frozen hands for a few minutes. She hoped that now her tribesmen could live in warmth too. The beauty queen was reminiscing about the good old days. Her dad blew a gasket, saying she couldn't marry some dude she'd never even laid eyes on. But the island was freezing over, and their people had never even seen winter before. So the girl had already made up her mind. Ruhe used to be all sunshine and roses, but when a sudden cold snap hit, everyone freaked out. They never needed magic stones before. The Emperor's offer, marry the Archduke and get a ton of magic stones in return, was Ruhe's last hope. But her dad was sticking to his guns, because Yuna was his only heir. But the heroine figured that protecting her people was exactly what an heir should be doing. The main character kept telling herself she could handle this. She kept reminding herself that she had Uncle Delkin on her side, and Lord Ellis's secretary seemed like a good guy too. Suddenly, the Duchess's hands flashed into her memory. In Ruha, hunters were the most respected class. Plus, the main character had a whole year to live in the attic, but Yuna was actually happy about it, because it was a good time to get to know her husband. She had a feeling they'd hit it off. The beauty was so excited that she accidentally bumped into a magic stone. They immediately started falling, and the young girl panicked and tried to catch them before they smashed on the floor. But she got a little carried away. She accidentally fell against the door, which immediately swung open. The main character face-planted, then realized it was probably some kind of secret passage she hadn't noticed before. That fall kinda stung. Suddenly, a voice wanted to know what she was doing there. The main character was stunned to see her husband standing right in front of her, already in clean clothes and looking surprised. Theo was speechless for a few seconds. Yuna tried to explain that she was just trying to catch a rock, but the guy just didn't get what was up with this girl, because right now she should be up in the attic, bawling her eyes out. But instead, she decided to introduce herself again. The heroine said she really hoped they could get along. For some reason, the Archduke seemed to see his new wife's face in a new light, and he couldn't even tear his gaze away from her. He didn't understand why he hadn't really seen her when they first met. but he picked up that floral scent right away. Theo figured it must be this beautiful girl's perfume and started really checking her out. She was petite and graceful. Her eyelashes were like bird feathers, and her eyes were like two precious jewels. It was then Theo caught himself thinking some weird stuff. He mentally snapped himself out of it. Theo couldn't feel anything for her because weakness was not an option, so he couldn't fall for this girl. That meant he needed to become even colder and tougher. The guy decided to yell at her and send her back to the attic. He was about to do just that, but when he saw Yuna shivering from the cold, he immediately forgot everything he was going to say. Theo instead was like, "Why are you dressed so lightly?" He instantly realized he'd just put his foot in it. This messenger of the goddess Daphne was supposed to be the only person on the planet worthy of wielding her holy, earth-shattering power. But the truth is, everyone thought she was just a myth. Or at least, that's what they thought, until someone figured out how to steal her power. 2 months ago, the Archduke of Phoenix asked his most trusted advisor if this letter had really landed in his lap by pure dumb luck. It talked about a saint with a red mark, who could be sacrificed in a year. To take the saint's power, you gotta have the mark. Theo was the only one in the imperial family who didn't have the mark yet. For the royal family, marriage was a sacred bond of souls, and a person only received their mark exactly 1 year after the wedding. The mark lasted a lifetime, so choosing a partner was a serious decision. But every one of the Lord's former companions either ran away or died. The Archduke's third potential wife was successfully taken care of, and now the preparations for receiving the mark were finally complete. To be precise, the Emperor took care of all of them. The Archduke was Emperor Bio's nephew on his mother's side. They called him a war demon and a beast who flew into a rage on the battlefield, inspiring genuine terror in everyone around him. Theo buried his mother at 15 and went to the battlefield for the first time. Since then, fear had become a luxury he couldn't afford. If he showed weakness for even a moment, he would surely fall. And with him, the North would fall, along with all its people. Theo buried his emotions right alongside his enemies. But it backfired, and his own people started giving him the cold shoulder. Every single one of his wives either ran for the hills, risking everything just to get away from the monster, or ended up pushing up daisies. But Theo? He didn't feel a damn thing. He just let time slip by, days turning into years. The advisor said they desperately needed a plan because the emperor couldn't be allowed to just run wild. So Theo just decided to marry her. Eulis was pissed, asking how he could marry a woman who was going to be sacrificed in a year. Theo replied, ice in his voice, that the emperor wouldn't dare lay a hand on her, but he needed to get her mark on him. The Archduke was dying to know what the great emperor would say if the mark actually showed up. And now, here he was, face to face with his new wife. Theo steeled himself, ready to scare the living daylights out of her. But out of nowhere, the young girl asked his lordship, all innocent-like, if he wasn't cold right now. The lord replied icily that he felt no cold. But for some reason, a look of pure delight spread across Yuna's face. She shyly looked away the moment she realized his lordship's outfit was a bit revealing. And Theo didn't understand her reaction. But he quickly realized that his plan was working. Theo mentioned that if you crossed the bridge, you could get to his private terrace. If she ever wanted to go anywhere, she had to ask him, because she wasn't allowed to go anywhere without his permission. To top it off, Theo decided to intimidate her. He said dead serious that he was even capable of catching a rare pure white squirrel. The main character was shocked to learn that it was only a few steps from the attic to his lordship's chambers. Suddenly, a strong gust of wind blew. Out of nowhere, Yuna started to lose her balance. The man's hand shot out instinctively. The next thing she knew, the main character was right up against her husband, and her face instantly flushed crimson from the closeness. She froze, just staring at him. A faint blush crept onto Theo's face too. This girl felt weightless, like a feather, and her figure was so delicate. He held her hand like he was cradling a tiny bird. "Your Grace," Yuna whispered. The Archduke yanked his hand away from the girl, assuming she just couldn't stand him touching her. His previous wives would practically have convulsions if he laid a finger on them. But then, out of nowhere, Yuna thanked him. To his former wives, his subjects, and enemy soldiers, the Archduke of the North was, and always would be, pure nightmare fuel. But Yuna's eyes showed absolutely zero fear. Theo suddenly wondered, what was the point of even trying to look scary? Besides, Theo could give this beautiful girl anything she wanted. So if he offered her something valuable, Yuna wouldn't be able to leave. He asked the heroine if she needed any magic stones. Yuna knew the Archduke was clued in on why she married him. But he probably wouldn't dig it if the leading lady pointed out right now that this whole marriage is strictly business. So Yuna told him he didn't have to hand them over just yet. Theo was surprised, but asked what she wanted then. He immediately noticed the young woman's expression shift, and she started to mull something over after he spoke. It was anyone's guess what words were about to come out of her mouth. Maybe she was about to ask to go home. Whatever she was about to say, though, she was in for a letdown, 'cause Theo wasn't letting her go anywhere. Yuna suggested they have breakfast together, but he reflexively turned her down. Once the meaning of her words hit Theo, he asked her to repeat what she'd just said. The main character, beaming with a huge, genuine smile, asked His Grace again to have breakfast with her. She wasn't asking for jewels or cash, just a simple breakfast together. But Theo was stumped. What could this tiny little thing even eat for breakfast? He was half tempted to go forage for acorns. Suddenly, Yuna started apologizing for even asking. The Archduke had been silent for so long, so she just went for it. She was just hoping for a light chat over breakfast, a way to get to know each other better, and then BAM. Theo agreed, but he suggested that lunch would be better. The advisor was ticked off that he'd been woken up so early. He couldn't figure out why His Grace needed to replace the head chef in the kitchen at the crack of dawn. So, Euless figured it was because of the Archduchess. Theo pointed out that Yuna's his wife now, which means they gotta at least pretend to be a couple sometimes. Euless guessed the Lord was getting a little sweet on the girl. Maybe the boss will finally start living a real life. The advisor decided to help out and suggested his lordship send Earl Delcon to the northern wall to deal with the refugee problem. That'll take a solid 3 months, which means Yuna won't be around him the whole time. The main character was totally shocked when her uncle told her he was being sent to the northern wall on her husband's orders. Before leaving, Delcon wanted to talk about something. He asked his niece if they'd, sealed the deal yet. Uncle straight up asked if she'd slept with the Archduke yet, and the main character just blushed like crazy. Delcon got pissed when he found out nothing had happened. With a face like that, she could have gotten him into bed ages ago. He should be guiding his niece, but instead, he's got to ride out to the northern wall because of some refugees. So, he told Yuna that her husband wouldn't like her if they hadn't, sealed the deal yet. She needed to seduce him like yesterday. Delcon suggested his niece wear something bold, an outfit that would definitely attract attention. Suddenly, there was a noise. Yuna wondered what that was. Her uncle told her to remember his advice, and, understanding, the main character stepped out onto the big terrace. A voice nearby mentioned she'd freeze pretty quick. The Archduke threw his jacket around the heroine. He explained to the young girl that if she caught a cold, it'd be a whole new headache, so they needed to avoid that. Blushing, Yuna thanked the man, but the jacket was huge, so Theo decided to slice off the sleeves with his sword. The heroine quickly replied that she'd just roll them up, and it'd be fine, and they shouldn't ruin something nice. Theo barely suppressed a smile and asked if she'd seen Delcon today. Yuna nodded and said he was leaving on business. But the truth was, Theo knew everything they talked about, because he could hear it all perfectly from the hallway. He just happened to overhear the whole conversation. "Since Delcon's not around," Theo said, "you can come to me with any problems." But for some reason, the girl just seemed embarrassed. Delcon had told her she just needed to, play nice with him, and then the magic stones would flow right into her hands. Suddenly, Yuna's stomach let out a loud growl. The main character immediately started apologizing. She usually always ate breakfast, but she couldn't today, and she hadn't eaten since yesterday. Theo's face instantly turned bright red. This girl was just too damn cute. A little later, the Archduke of the North was already sitting in his office, surrounded by imaginary birds, lost in thought. His subordinates didn't understand why he was admiring his fingers. Theo's personal physical therapist, David, was stoked because the boss had called him for once. He used to be a battlefield medic back in the day. Out there, he learned the hard way that emotional wounds are way tougher to heal than physical ones. His lordship's wounds ran deep, 'cause the guy was totally indifferent to everything, like he didn't have any feelings at all. So, something must be seriously messed up right now. David asked how bad the symptoms were, and Theo said they were pretty rough. The personal therapist's eyes lit up, and he asked his lordship to describe exactly how he was feeling. In a deadpan voice, Theo announced that he'd been cursed. The guys working under him looked totally confused. They didn't get who'd have the nerve to curse the Archduke himself, and the dark-haired guy explained he was currently taming someone. Theo explained that it was a long-tailed tit. It was super tiny and cute, but the powerful Archduke of the North was absolutely convinced this little fragile bird had somehow cast a spell on him. David asked what made his lordship suspect a curse. Theo slammed the table and yelled that he couldn't stop thinking about her. He was dying to just stick her in his pocket and carry her around everywhere, so he could constantly gaze at her otherworldly beauty. Silence fell over the room. David wasn't expecting a story about a bird. But, gotta say, it's the first time His Highness has shown any emotion in ages, so things are definitely looking up. David declared with conviction that he really had been cursed. Normally, he'd just whip up a special magic antidote to cancel out any magical effects. But first, we gotta show this bird to someone else. If the bird's enchanted, the charm magic will affect them too. If the Archduke figures out on his own that this infatuation isn't magic, it'll be easier for him to accept the change in himself. Theo told David that was his first genuinely useful suggestion. The physical therapist was happy to hear the praise. He left the room, and then the advisor asked his lord if he really thought Yuna was using magic. Yulis would be showing symptoms too then. But they'll learn the truth when they take David's advice. The hunting day was coming up, and all those damn rich guys will be gathered in one place. Perfect for showing off Her Highness, the Archduchess of the North. Yulis was in charge of getting everything ready. Theo also asked him to make sure Yuna was bundled up warm. The advisor suddenly felt awkward and assured his lord that he'd take care of it. A couple days later, Yulis and Yuna headed outside. He immediately noticed her hands were red and offered her some gloves. They were almost at the hunting lodge, where the nobles gather once a month to hunt with the Archduke. Today was the first hunt. Yuna still didn't know all the local etiquette. The advisor explained that the river wasn't completely frozen yet, but when it was, they could go ice skating on it. But Yuna didn't know what that was, so Yulis promised to get her a pair just for her. They reached the cottage, and the advisor opened the door for the girl. Inside, Yuna immediately noticed several men. One of them walked right up to the main character and said with enthusiasm that she really was a beauty, and the servants hadn't been lying about it. The Archduke was probably very pleased. Yulis asked the gentlemen to remember their manners. But they didn't understand what they'd said wrong, because the girl really was beautiful, so there was nothing indecent in their words. They knew she'd been sold in exchange for magic stones, so they started offering the girl their magic stones. The main character clenched her fist, because she was really not liking hearing that kind of talk directed at her. Yulis asked, outraged, what the heck they were saying. What in the hell is going on here? The Archduke asked, ice in his voice. The nobles freaked, seeing the Archduke of the North's angry mug on the second floor, and stammered, how long have you been up there? Theo ordered Yulis to escort the lady to the second floor. The noble, sounding totally lost, suggested his grace go hunting, but the Archduke coldly announced it was cancelled. Then, quick as lightning, he grabbed the jerk by the collar and hoisted him up with one hand. Theo promised him he wouldn't get away with this. The Archduke gripped the noble's hand hard and asked if he'd been hoarding magic stones. Did he really think he had more than the Archduke of the North? Then he tossed the poor bastard to the floor. Theo said, his voice like ice, listen up and listen good. They should have just walked out quietly, but if they cough up those hidden gems they're hoarding from the Empire, they get to keep their limbs. The Archduke wanted me to relay that anyone who disrespects the Archduchess will find their life cut dramatically short. The aristocrats panicked and bolted immediately. The main character was sitting on the couch, waiting for her husband. She'd never been humiliated like that before. Suddenly, the young woman heard a commotion downstairs and started to worry that the Archduke was getting into trouble because of her. But then, the man opened the door. Yuna was surprised to see him. He saw how the other aristocrats really treated her, which meant Theo definitely didn't think she was suitable to be his wife anymore. The man knelt down in front of the girl and asked for her hand. Yuna's face twisted in confusion. The Archduke immediately explained he thought he saw a wound on her hand, and Yuna looked at it, surprised. Sure enough, her arm was streaked with red scratches from her nails. Theo applied a healing stone paste, and it healed up quick. He asked, concerned, if it hurt a lot. Instead of answering, the Archduke heard his wife apologize for him being insulted because of her. Important people came to this hunt, and good relations with them are vital, so she was really worried. But Theo told her to remember that in these lands, he's only second to the Archduchess. Within his territory, she could do whatever she wanted. Theo was the master of these lands, and she was his master. The main character pondered her husband's words. He was right. She really had nothing to fear, given her status as the Archduchess of the North. But the unease lingered. His Grace was her husband. She pulled her hand away because the thought made her uncomfortable. Because of her reaction, the guy figured she was probably bummed about being stuck here for the long haul. Yuna asked if he was going hunting now. She unclasped her cloak and explained that Euless had gotten her a hunting outfit. Theo froze, completely speechless. This awesome outfit was custom-made for today, so it'd be a shame to let it go to waste. Up until now, he'd only ever seen her in frumpy dresses. Back then, Theo thought she seemed so weightless. The Archduke immediately face-palmed, realizing what he was just thinking, and mentally ordered himself to get a grip. Yuna asked if she looked that weird. Theo shot down her assumptions and asked if she'd ever hunted before. The girl nodded and excitedly explained that she even knew how to use a slingshot, but she'd never managed to bag any game. She was like a cute little critter herself. Theo reached out his hand and suggested they just take a walk in the woods. The main character took his hand and, with a warm smile, told the Archduke that it was a wonderful idea. And so, that's what our heroes did. There were a lot of flowers here, but they didn't smell like anything. That's because they were grown with magic stones, so the flowers were fake and had no scent. Yuna suggested they go a different way. Our hero thought the scent of her hair was kinda nice, while the girl was checking out the other flowers, totally stoked. Theo realized it was actually a good thing the flowers didn't smell. Whether it was a spell or not didn't matter. The Archduchess was just beautiful, plain and simple. Suddenly, the girl told his lordship that this would be a good place to try skating, even though she didn't know what it was. Theo explained they were boots with blades attached, but he was worried about the harsh weather, which Yuna wasn't used to. The main character, with an excited smile, asked if he'd teach her to skate and sled when the time came. If that's what she wanted, then hell yeah, he could make it happen. Theo suddenly noticed her hands were all red. He cursed himself out in his head, 'cause he should have grabbed her a damn coat or something warm. Yuna pulled out some gloves from her pocket, saying Euless gave them to her. They were a little big, but at least her hands were nice and toasty. Then she started going on about how kind Euless is to her, and how thoughtful he always is. Theo's brow instantly furrowed. Is this the same Euless who screwed over countless lords to get them off the council? That guy was willing to pull the dirtiest, low-down tricks to win the war, stopping at absolutely nothing. Euless was always on Theo's back, lecturing him like a damn schoolteacher. And for some reason, Yuna thought he was all kind and caring. Euless instantly felt a chill down his neck, sending shivers all through him, and a really bad feeling in his gut. But he figured it was just a draft. Theo realized it was all because of the gift. The main character decided he needed to get her something too, so she'd think he was kind and caring as well, but nothing felt right. The guy was racking his brain, trying to figure out what to get her. He had to have something perfect lying around. Next to him, Theo noticed a red box, and when he opened it, he found earrings with a huge ruby inside. Just then, Euless walked into the office. He said he'd taken care of those lords who'd stood out during the hunt. Noticing his lord's intense stare, the advisor asked if something was wrong. But the Archduke of the North replied he had no doubt such a kind and attentive man had done everything perfectly. Euless realized it was all about the gloves. He suggested his lord also give the girl something, and immediately noticed his mother's earrings. The advisor asked him to reconsider that decision, but Theo replied that the girl wasn't going anywhere, and these earrings were way more valuable and meaningful than some fabric gloves. Euless knew he couldn't convince this stubborn mule. The Archduke stood up from the table, deciding to present the gift right now. He walked to the shelf and ordered his kind and attentive advisor to get out of here, instead of standing there like a statue. Euless smiled, because it was like his lord had been given a new lease on life. Theo was beaming as he carried the gift. He reached Yuna's door and knocked right away. The young woman told him to hold on a second, and Theo started impatiently waiting for her to finally come out. But when she did, he froze. Yuna was wearing something very revealing. Just one look at her, and the Archduke felt like he was burning up, totally confused by whatever spell she had cast. She immediately started covering herself, thinking it was just the maid. Theo wanted to tell her that from now on, he only wanted to see her in that outfit. But he just thought it. He didn't actually say it out loud. Theo explained he came to drop something off, but since it wasn't a good time, he promised to come back later. But Yuna grabbed his arm and begged him to stay. She said she wasn't uncomfortable at all. The guy realized it was some kind of messed up curse that could control his body's reactions. Everything in that room belonged to Yuna, and Theo told her she could take whatever she wanted. She looked like cotton candy in that robe. Theo held out a small box. Surprise flashed across the main character's face the second she opened it and saw what was inside. The girl asked the Archduke of the North, totally confused, if he was really giving it to her, and the guy, looking a little flustered, nodded. But Yuna had no idea what to wish for. She was genuinely happy with the gift. As soon as Yuna thanked the guy, a warm smile spread across the main character's face, seeing her so happy. He was just glad she liked it. The main heroine was lost in thought. If she and the Archduke keep getting closer like this, they might actually become a normal married couple one day and live happily ever after. Yuna really hoped that day would come soon. A week later, they were having dinner together. The main heroine's personal maid, Rei, let out a heavy sigh. At 12 years old, she went to war in place of her sickly older brother to defend the country and her family's honor. The other knights used to constantly make fun of her, but the Archduke personally took it upon himself to teach her swordsmanship. So Rei helped the guy win the war, and they even made her an honorary knight of the freaking empire for it. But it sucked, because she realized the dude just couldn't find any joy in anything. Rei decided to retire and follow him back to his castle. She was gonna dedicate her life to serving his family, but his lordship had already gone through 3 wives, so she started getting a little worried. Good thing the new lady of the house had a heart of gold. With a woman like that around, the guy's got a shot at being happy. That's what Rei thought anyway. But she was seriously ticked off because the Archduke of the North was being a total grump today. Yuna was totally blown away by the beautiful garden. She asked the guy what his favorite flowers were, but the dude just deadpanned that he doesn't like flowers at all, which just made Rei even angrier. Yuna offered to have tea, but Theo said he'd just have it brought to his office. A look of sadness immediately washed over her face. The advisor took a good look at the Archduchess, and noticing her bare ears, figured the master was upset about it. He whispered in Rei's ear that he had an idea. The girl suggested a little aggressive intervention, but the advisor said they needed to get His Highness aside first. Rei quickly made up some excuse to get the master to step away for a second. Theo stood up and told Yuna he'd be right back. Euless approached the girl and asked if he could ask her a rather personal question. The main character agreed, of course. And then the advisor asked if His Highness had given her any expensive gifts the night before. She nodded, and the man explained that those earrings used to belong to the late Archduchess. These jewels are all I have left to remember my mother by. The Archduke valued it immensely. The main character realized her biggest mistake and asked the advisor what she should do in such a tough spot. She actually had a reason for it. Rei was just following her master's orders. Theo asked the maid if she was planning to stab him in the back, because it was written all over her face. She asked, indignant, why he was being so distant with the mistress. Did she somehow screw things up with him? But the dark-haired man immediately replied that it wasn't about her at all, and it was probably that the Archduchess just didn't like him. But people who are that cold aren't usually very popular. Theo asked if the lady had ever mentioned those earrings. Rei asked the lord if he was talking about the ruby earrings that belonged to his late mother. Now she understood why the lord was in such a foul mood. But there was no reason to get bent out of shape about it. Rei suggested that the lady was saving the expensive jewelry for a special occasion, so the lord should apologize. Suddenly, Yuna caught up to them. Gasping for air, she said she had something to tell them. Yuna held out a box and explained that everything had been explained to her, and these earrings were actually a memento of his late mother. She couldn't possibly accept them now. Theo wasn't surprised that such a gift made her uncomfortable. It's bad enough she accepted them in the first place, and Theo apologized for even causing a fuss. But he still asked Yuna to keep them. Then she blurted out that she couldn't wear them. The dark-haired guy tensed up when the young woman suddenly approached him and stared him right in the eyes. She explained that she just didn't have pierced ears. Turns out, Yuna just had a mole on her earlobe. To wear those earrings, the main character would have to get her ears pierced first, but she couldn't do it alone. But she was dying to wear those rubies as soon as possible. So, she pleaded with her husband, asking if he'd help her out. The Archduke of the North asked again if she was sure, and she nodded, saying she'd wanted to wear earrings her whole life. Looks like her dad left a mark here, almost like a puncture wound, but it was actually a red mark on the saint's body. The main girl told the guy, all excited, that she was asking him, specifically because she really trusted him. He touched her chin and said he was starting. Theo was so close it made Yuna blush. It might sting a bit, but the hero promised to make it as quick as possible, and Yuna just needed to hang in there. He brought the needle to her ear. The main girl squeezed her eyes shut, feeling the pain. Blood started flowing, and Theo immediately stopped and anxiously asked the young girl if she was okay. He stood up abruptly, deciding to call for a doctor after all. But Yuna, all smiles, reminded him she still needed the other ear pierced and offered to do it herself. Theo decided to handle it himself, though. After a bit, it was done. The main character put on the earrings and asked His Holiness what he thought, and he just stared, mesmerized, saying they were beautiful. Suddenly, his eyes went wide. He was instantly reminded of his mother. The young man also remembered that intense feeling he had back then, but it was so long ago. Ignoring the heavy snow, he tried to shout to his mom, but Mom was lying unconscious in the endless white. A little earlier, Karen Rose had promised her son she'd be back soon, so the protection of their lands was temporarily in his hands. She was more of a knight than a ruler, you know? But she bit the dust on a mission, serving the Empire's interests. That incredible woman dedicated her entire life to taming the North and ultimately gave her life for the dukedom. Theo had to make sure her sacrifice wasn't in vain. To protect her legacy, he needed to get stronger. Time passed, and eventually, the only reminder that Karen Rose had ever lived there was a pair of ruby earrings. Theo never really paid them much attention, but now he was overcome with grief, though it vanished instantly when he looked at the new owner. He wanted to tell Yuna how happy he was that she was his wife, but he held back and just thanked her. Truth is, only her family ever called her that. So, she actually liked the fact that the Archduke was using her too. The guy said that he didn't have any nicknames. Everyone just called him Theo, so she could do that too. Of course, the main character agreed. Since Theo gave her a family heirloom, that probably meant he already saw her as his wife. Before you know it, pet names will be flying around, and then there'll be Mom and Dad. But the main character knew perfectly well that was still a long way off. But the thought made him smile. The next day, Yuna and Ray went out into the garden. It didn't freeze all year round thanks to the magic stones, so the flower beds had to be constantly weeded. Otherwise, everything would get overgrown. Yuna said that the flowers in Rua had a really sweet scent. Maybe someday they'll actually get to visit that place together. But the heroine remembered her uncle's advice, telling her not to bring up Rue too much, so she wouldn't seem off. For now, all she could do was send letters. Yuna wondered if her latest letter had arrived yet. It had the usual greeting and a few words about his lordship's bravery and how he was the most handsome man in the north. But maybe that was a little much. Ray thought something was up, but Yuna quickly explained that she was just spacing out. Sometimes the main character wished she could rewind time, but then the maid suddenly spotted his lordship in the bushes. He was clearly trying to hide. Ray immediately started waving her arms, trying to get the Archduke to stay hidden. The main character started thinking about sending her dad another letter, but this time, she'd choose her words carefully. Theo knew she was missing home, but was Yuna regretting her decision and now wanted to go back? He wasn't about to let that happen, so Yuna's personal maid was caught off guard when the guy suddenly jumped up from behind the bushes. The heroine immediately turned towards the sound, but Ray quickly told her not to worry about it. She offered to show her mistress a pretty flower. Yuna had just started calling him by his name, and now she was suddenly thinking about calling the whole thing off. That's what Theo figured. But he wasn't gonna let that fly. Yuna was his wife now. It had already been 2 months since Yuna arrived. She ate pretty well and wasn't picky about the local food, always asking to send her compliments to the chef. Every day, she'd take a walk in the garden. Theo had already figured she'd forgotten all about going home, so he wasn't expecting her to be in such a hurry to leave. It takes a whole month to get to Rue. Suddenly, the guy realized he could recreate the Rue settlement right here in the duchy. He could even move Yuna's tribespeople there. He remembered that Yuna married him because of the magic stones, so Theo will give her even more stones, and she definitely won't go anywhere and will stay with him for the rest of her days. If the Emperor or Delcan get in the way, he'll just wipe them off the map. Suddenly, a woman's voice called out to Theo. The dark-haired dude immediately hid the magic stone behind his back and flashed Yuna a smile. Over tea, he asked if she had a tough time climbing up. But Yuna just said it was no big deal. She just didn't want to pull him away from anything important, so she was willing to do whatever it took. Theo's face instantly turned red. The girl held out her hands and offered him a look. The guy's attention snapped to the Archduchess's hands, which were pretty delicate, pale, and unbelievably soft. Yuna said she found it in the garden and suggested he take a whiff. Theo agreed to do it. The main character immediately felt the guy's lips, which were now super close to her hands. His breath tickled my fingers. Theo said you can make a broth from this plant for the sick. These petals grew in the valley near Yuna's house in Ruhe, so she was super stoked to find them in the Archduke's garden. Dad always collected them and made tea whenever she caught a cold. Yuna's eyes lit up whenever she thought about home. So, the guy decided to give her a ton of magic stones tomorrow, and Yuna suddenly asked if he'd mind if she went back there. Theo asked if she really wanted to, and she explained she just needed some drying equipment. The main character suggested they go together. Even though Theo got sidetracked, he dug the idea. He could leave the duchy for a long time and not sweat it, since Euless would absolutely crush it as his replacement. Theo agreed and said he'd ask the advisor to pack their things. They'd be on the road for at least a month, so they needed to get ready. But the main girl was just talking about the city market, which wasn't that far, so all that packing wasn't necessary. I hear they sell tons of delicious stuff there. The guy froze as soon as he realized what the girl said. The next day, Ray explained to the lady that there would be a lot of people at the market, so she couldn't wander far from his grace and needed to be careful. Yuna promised she'd bring back lots of yummy treats. Once everything was ready, Ray handed the lady over to Euless. The advisor asked her grace to get into the carriage and immediately explained that his lordship would be there soon, too. The girl smiled and thanked Euless. The guy shut the door and looked around, thinking the lord better hurry up. The main character figured Theo must be swamped with work today. That's why he's so late. Still, it was awesome they were riding together. Maybe they'd even get to hold hands. The carriage door swung open, and the Archduke immediately apologized to the young woman for making her wait. Today, he thought Yuna looked even more like a bunny. The guy explained he was pretty much done with all his stuff. Truth was, there wasn't that much work today. But Theo had to keep up the image of being a big shot in front of his wife. Euless announced they were heading out. Yuna noticed Theo was acting different today. His hair was styled, he had a fresh haircut, and he was even wearing a tie, which he totally hates. The girl explained that she needed equipment specifically for drying leaves. She also wanted to pick up some sweets. Suddenly, the carriage hit a small rock. The driver stopped immediately, and the advisor, Euless, anxiously asked the lord and lady if they were all right. He apologized if it had startled them. At that moment, Yuna was already in the man's arms. The main character's face instantly flushed from being so close to this young woman, and his heart started racing. He immediately caught a sweet floral scent. We had to let her go, pronto. But then, the dark-haired dude's lips started inching closer to the girl, and she was totally down, already closing her eyes. That's when Euless barged in, yelling, "You guys all right?" Theo just decided in his head to play dumb and pretend he heard nothing. He hoped Yuna hadn't heard anything with her ears covered, but then she awkwardly suggested they answer the advisor. The Archduke just said they could get moving. Now they were sitting next to each other, still too shy to hold hands. The main girl decided to make the first move and lightly touched the young man's hand, sending shivers down his spine. Theo's face immediately went a little red. The Archduke realized this was it, his shot. Working up his courage, the guy went for it and tried to take Yuna's hand. But Euless announced to his grace that they'd arrived, and our heroes immediately pulled away, sitting across from each other. The girl asked, all confused, why the market was completely deserted. Theo replied, lost in thought, that he didn't even know. The main character pointed to a tea shop and suggested they head over there. And the Archduke, of course, agreed. Euless figured it shouldn't take too long. They needed to get it done in 2 hours. Since the master had shut down the entire market to the townspeople, trade in the city had basically ground to a halt, and people were just stuck waiting. Lord Theo promised they'd try to hurry things along. Still, it was nice to see them happy. The shopkeeper wished the lord and lady a good day the second our heroes left his store. Now they had everything they needed. Yuna suggested they check out one more place. The merchants looked terrified, but the main character wasn't expecting anything but fear from them anymore. There was a good reason he closed the market to shoppers during their visit. Theo didn't want Yuna to notice everyone was scared to death of him. The main heroine pointed to one of the sweet shops and told the man she wanted to try something. They had strawberries, mandarins, and even peaches. The girl selling everything was surprised by how tall the man was. Her mom warned her that if she misbehaved, the Archduke would take her away. So now the girl was scared. Yuna asked the little shopkeeper for a recommendation on what to get. The kid looked up at the beautiful woman, totally starstruck. The girl said the strawberries were super tasty, but she personally liked the tangerines better, and her little brother loved the apples the most. So Yuna asked Theo which ones they should pick. The guy just said they'd take everything. The main character laughed and told the Archduke that if they ate all those sweets, they definitely wouldn't have room for dinner. So they decided to just try the strawberries and tangerines. People behind them started whispering when they saw the Archduke. That guy used to tear people apart, but next to the beautiful Archduchess, he looked more like a lovesick puppy. The little girl handed the sweets to the lady. Yuna thanked the girl for helping her choose. The heroine noticed the little merchant looked a bit pale, but the girl quickly said she just needed to sit down. It's all because of that Archduke. Yuna said they could watch the stall while she rested. The little one promised she'd be right back. The main character couldn't stop smiling. But as soon as the girl ran off, the young woman confessed to the man that she had a bad feeling about this. It's totally deserted here today, and the shops are empty. Now Theo felt responsible. He didn't want Yuna to get upset, so he gestured to his advisor to open the gates immediately. It's only been a minute, and the market's already packed with people. Yuna was hoping someone would want to buy some fruit. A little kid spotted the sweet stall and asked his dad to buy him some, but the guy froze when he saw the Archduke. As soon as the boy ran up to the stall, Yuna offered him a sample. The kid's dad nervously asked for a peach, and the main character immediately gave it to them, thanking them for the purchase. Theo wished them a good appetite. At this rate, the day flew by. Everything was going great, but the main character didn't get why the townspeople were scared of the Archduke, 'cause he seemed like a really nice guy. Yuna decided she needed to loosen up a little. So, she held out a strawberry to Theo and told him to give it a try. Her hand slid over to his, smooth as silk, and she said that this strawberry was seriously amazing. Theo just froze up right there. The main girl was closing in, so the dude ended up trying the sugared strawberry, even though he wasn't really a fan. But he did it for Yuna. She suggested they hit up the market again sometime. Theo was totally down with that plan. Night fell, and the Archduke was standing at his office window, replaying the day's events over and over. Yuna was the one who grabbed his hand first. He couldn't believe she might actually like him back. Theo decided to celebrate their first touch and immediately crack open a special bottle of wine he'd been saving for a big moment. Euless walked into the office and told me they bought up everything the merchants couldn't sell by the end of the day. People were super grateful for the Archduke's initiative. There's even a rumor going around town that Her Grace herself is looking out for the people's well-being. Then, Euless showed me the report on Count Delcan, who, it turns out, was in contact with the High Priest of the Temple of Daphne. Theo started studying the report carefully. It seemed fishy, and Euless confirmed my suspicions. That meeting took place in the Eye of the Storm. The main temple of the goddess Daphne was located right in the center of the Eye of the Storm, on top of a mountain where a whirlwind has raged since time began. Only select priests are allowed inside. Before leaving the temple, he'd have to lose all memories of his time spent there. Delcan contacted the priest to get intel on the saint. The high priest said the Archduchess is the saint. This saint is overflowing with the goddess's light, pure as the driven snow, radiant as the sun, and you can spot her by a red mark on her ear. Once her true nature is revealed, everyone around will understand her destiny. Her Grace got the mark after her coming-of-age ceremony, and that's when the seasons started changing on Ruha Island. They found a stone near the Eye of the Storm with text in the Ruha language, but even Delcan couldn't figure out all the details. His Grace didn't notice any stone either when he rushed in to save his mother. Euless said he'd start by contacting the people of Ruha. Theo didn't get why that Storm's Eye of all places. "Hold on a sec, Mylene," the Archduke's advisor said, his voice tired as they climbed the spiral staircase. She stopped. "Already worn out?" "Seriously?" Euless reminded her. "Desk job, remember? Mountains of paperwork." Mylene scoffed. "Weakling! Tell me about the Archduchess. What's she like?" Euless said, "She's kind. And the Archduke? He's totally head over heels for her. I heard they even went to the city recently. Sounds like a romantic getaway." But Euless just told her, "Don't go spreading rumors." Then, he knocked on Her Highness's door. The Archduke's advisor announced to his mistress, "I've brought you the new maid." And she immediately gave them permission to enter. Ray was carefully brushing her hair. The main character greeted the new girl. Malin immediately introduced herself to her ladyship and promised to take her duties seriously. Yuna thanked the girl in advance for her hard work. Truth be told, Malin was a little ticked at her older brother, who didn't even hint that the Archduchess was a total knockout. It was Malin's first day on the job. Ray said that in that case, she'd get back to her duties at the training grounds. Malin offered to take over Ray's duties with her hair. She told her mistress that she looked absolutely stunning today, especially her hair, which was as captivating as the first snowfall, but Yuna had probably heard that a million times. Then, Malin suggested that her mistress take a walk with the Archduke during the snowfall. They say if you see the first snow with your sweetheart, your love will last forever. That was seriously beautiful and romantic. A smile crept across the main character's face. She really wanted to be with the Archduke like a real married couple, and the young woman believed it was totally possible. While they were out, Yuna asked what people in Phoenix did for fun. Like, did they have any festivals or fairs? The Archduke was always leaving the fortress for other duchies on business, and Yuna really just wanted to go somewhere with him. Hearing that, Mei Ling felt the need to drop some knowledge. She promised to put together a list of all the festivals and cool spots in Phoenix. Yuna suggested they head back and check out the White Tower on the way. The Archduke walked up to them and asked if they were already heading back. The heroine perked up when she saw Theo. She asked if he'd decided to take a stroll too, and the guy just smiled a little and said he needed some air. Plus, he figured it'd be cool to walk together. Theo noticed the unfamiliar girl, and Maylene immediately introduced herself. The main character apologized to His Grace, explaining that she and Maylene had already decided to head to the White Tower. But the tower was actually black. Theo explained that when it snows, it makes the tower roof pure white, and the locals take it as a sign that winter's here. Yuna wondered when the first snow would fall. She needed to get Theo to go for a walk with her. But out of nowhere, the guy says he has no clue and is actually hoping this snow thing doesn't even happen. He hates snow. The sight of white already makes him want to puke. Yuna, totally confused, asks if the first snowfall isn't supposed to be a good thing. But the Archduke just snaps back that there's no such thing as good snow, which throws the girls for a loop. Out of the blue, Yuna spins around and announces she's leaving since he's so against the color white. Maylene immediately started apologizing to the master. The main character was totally baffled, not understanding why Yuna was overreacting so much right now. A little later, Eulis asked if he could present his report. Theo, with a stern glare, gave him the go-ahead. The advisor was sure that his lordship already knew this, but the Archduchess hasn't left the tower all day. She requested that all her meals be brought to her room. The lord asked sternly why she wasn't taking her walks anymore. In this situation, one wrong look from the advisor, and he was a goner, he was sure of it. Eulis replied that, in a way, you could understand the girl's reasoning. She didn't want to run into Theo, so she stayed inside. The man totally didn't get it, and then Eulis asked him what color her ladyship's hair was. Theo answered, white, and the advisor said that snow was also white. Yesterday, you said you couldn't stand even the color of snow, so her ladyship figured that dislike extended to her hair too. The lord was outraged, and Eulis added that that was her thought process. Everyone said the Archduchess's hair was as white as snow. Lord Theo stormed up to his advisor, pissed off, and demanded, "What the hell is any of this about?" In his eyes, Yuna's hair wasn't just white. It had this warm glow to it. Eulis agreed, but all that mattered was how Yuna took it. He strolled casually to the door and announced, "Guess I'll be going then." The main character couldn't just let things slide, so, filled with determination, he went to his chair and grabbed his jacket. He decided he needed to talk to Yuna as soon as possible. Knocking on the door, the guy asked, "You in there?" Getting no answer, the Archduke explained to the young woman, "I need to tell you something, and it can't wait." That's why he wanted to meet, to talk things through. Finally, Yuna opened the door and let him in. The guy was floored, seeing Yuna wrapped up in this huge, fluffy blanket that covered almost everything but her face. He asked her to sit down, and she said okay. Theo suggested she take the blanket off, but Yuna refused. If the Archduke didn't like her hair because it reminded him of snow, then yeah, definitely not a good idea. The guy immediately walked over and yanked the blanket off her head. He explained that he never thought her hair looked like snow. Theo confessed that he actually thinks it's really beautiful, and the main character's eyes went wide with surprise at that. The Archduke apologized to Yuna for upsetting her, but the girl apologized herself for misunderstanding everything. The main character admitted that he's actually constantly awkward around her, and Yuna asked him why. Theo felt ashamed that he'd tried to force her to stay in the north. Yuna asked him why he didn't like the snow. The female lead was stunned when she learned that the Archduke of the North's beloved mother had died because of the snow. Originally, the Empire had very few magic stones at its disposal. They were always short, which meant the people of Phoenix were constantly freezing. And then the Kingdom of Bio promised that if they investigated the Eye of the Storm, they'd lift the restrictions on importing magic stones. The Eye of the Storm was located where a snowstorm always raged. The chances of returning from there alive were slim to none. However, Theo's mother, Archduchess Karen Rose, went straight to the Eye of the Storm to help her people. The guy said he barely managed to find her body, because by the time he got there, he was almost snowed in. That's exactly why Theo hated the snow. If it wasn't for that crap, he could have gotten there in time to save his mom. Yuna quietly said she was really sorry to hear that. Theo smiled and said it was all right. The main character froze, looking at him surprised when he reached out and gently touched the earrings she was wearing. The fact that Yuna wore those trinkets brought him some comfort. Then Theo got up and told her to get some rest. Out of nowhere, Yuna asked if he'd been hitting the bottle again today, and the Archduke stopped dead in his tracks. The thing is, Yuna had been watching him through a crack in the door the whole time. The heroine offered to have a drink with him. The Archduke was taken aback by the girl's offer. Theo looked so bummed out when he was telling his story. The main character just really wanted to cheer him up. Booze always lifts your spirits and gives you the guts to do stuff you normally wouldn't. Images started flashing through Theo's head instantly. He quickly shook them off and asked the girl if she'd ever had a drink before. Yuna nodded and said she'd had a glass of wine on the ship. Tonight, the main character could definitely use a little courage, which is why he agreed to the girl's suggestion. Theo hoped he hadn't taken too long picking out a drink. He caught his reflection in the window and realized he was starting to lose his edge, which meant he definitely needed to hit the gym tomorrow. Walking into the room, the man immediately apologized for the long wait. Yuna was already out cold, though. Girl spent the whole damn day cleaning the tower. The guy figured she deserved the rest. He just wanted to watch her sleep, so he laid down next to her. Yuna was gorgeous, even when she was snoozing. Suddenly, Theo noticed a strand of hair had fallen in her mouth. It was just a little piece, so he thought, no big deal, I'll just move it. Out of nowhere, Yuna turned towards him. Now her lips were way too close. Our boy's face went bright red. Her breathing was starting to get him all worked up. He decided to bail, stat. But then Yuna snuggled right up against his leg. Nobody's ever pushed his buttons like that, not since he was born. A little time passed, and then the main character slowly blinked awake, still kinda hazy on what was going on. She realized she'd dozed off for a bit. Then Yuna figured out what happened, and her eyes went wide. The main character started apologizing to Theo, trying to explain she just didn't realize she'd fallen asleep. Theo just said it was totally fine. He offered her some wine. But then, out of nowhere, Malin walked in and greeted her ladyship, not even noticing the Archduke at first. It wasn't until later that she caught sight of the Lord's stone-cold expression. Malin instantly turned red and begged for forgiveness. The main character was totally disoriented. She thought only a little time had passed, but turns out it was already morning. Theo got up and suggested they save the wine for another time. Yuna grabbed his hand and suggested they have dinner tonight instead. That way, they could open the wine, because the main character felt obligated to try at least a glass of the booze Theo picked out. Malin apologized to the Archduchess again, but Yuna just told her not to worry about it. An idea popped into the main character's head, and she asked her personal maid to tell her what His Grace's mother was like. The girl said Karen Rose was an incredible woman. His Grace went to hell and back trying to bring her home. When he rode alone straight into the heart of the storm, everything went to pieces, and a lot of people thought he was a goner. Luckily, the knights managed to find him and bring him back to the castle. But after that whole thing, the Lord was just itching for a fight. The main character figured that if she'd gone through what Theo did, she'd hate the snow too. Now, Yuna decided to return the favor for all his care. She went to see him all dressed up. The main character asked the Archduke if she could sit next to him, and of course, the dark-haired guy said yes. Over dinner, Yuna told him all about her day. She'd been cleaning the entire lower level of the tower. Even though it wasn't part of her duties as Archduchess, Yuna thought it was important and told him that would be their room. It was super cozy in there because there weren't any windows. The image flashed through the guy's mind instantly. His face went bright red, but he snapped out of it and suddenly realized Yuna was way bolder than he first thought. Out of nowhere, she announced they could hide from the snow there, because she's not a fan of it anymore either. So, they can take cover during the first snowfall. Instead of being stuck in one room, they can wander around the tower. Suddenly, with a hint of sadness in her voice, the main girl asked the guy if he gets bummed out when it snows. She didn't want him to be alone during those times. Also, Yuna really wanted to get to know Theo better. A warm smile spread across the Archduke's face, and he told the young woman that he's dying to get to know her too. So Yuna told me her mom died young, and she grew up with just her dad. He didn't like talking about her. Whenever she got curious about her mom, she'd build a bonfire down by the sea. It made her dad open up a bit. Theo suggested they light a bonfire too when winter comes. He poured some wine, smiled warmly, and explained it'd make it easier for them to really connect. Yuna stared at her reflection. If she finds herself by a fire with Theo one winter night, that's when she'll ask if she can truly be his wife. The Archduke proposed a toast to the coming winter. Suddenly, Euless burst into the room. Theo was about to protest, but the advisor told him they had a guest. He said he was from Ruha Island and introduced himself as Azurim, adding that Her Grace definitely knew him. Yuna exclaimed happily that he was her friend. She asked him to go see him, and Theo said he'd be right there. The main character ran off, humming a tune to herself. The advisor asked His Grace if he even realized that the Archduchess's friend was a guy. Azarim turned around, hearing Yuna's voice. He was the heir to the Apan tribe on Ruha Island. The main character ran up to the man and hugged him tightly, to which Azarim returned the young woman's embrace. The man said he really wanted to see her. Theo froze, seeing them holding hands. They were hugging and holding hands so casually. But the Duke of the North wasn't even sure if that was normal. Yuna introduced Theo to her childhood friend. The guy's face looked super tense. Azarin confidently approached the Duke and respectfully greeted him, offering his hand in a friendly gesture. Then, Azarin introduced himself to Yuna's husband. The girl immediately apologized to the Duke for her friend's lack of manners. Yuna explained to Azarin that this was the Duke of Phoenix, and the man offered his hand again, saying it was a pleasure to meet him. Theo didn't want Yuna to feel awkward, so he shook his hand back. But the guy couldn't forgive this dude for hugging Yuna, so he squeezed Azarim's hand, like, hard. Yuna's friend was all, "Is this guy a bear or something? He's huge!" But they were speaking some other language, and Theo, plastering on a smile, asked the girl to translate. The main girl, annoyed, snapped at her friend. "Can you just talk normally and switch to the common tongue already?" Out of nowhere, Azarim announces he's starving. Theo saw this as his chance to show Yuna what a generous husband and composed lord he was, totally ignoring her friend's forwardness. So he told Azarim, "Of course I'll feed you. My wife's dear friend should feel right at home." A little confusion flickered across Azarim's face. As soon as they sat down at the table, the main girl asked her friend, "How's everything back in the village? Has the weather gotten much worse?" Azarin reassured her, telling her there was nothing to worry about. The guy suddenly asked if the food was already gone. He pointed at the Archduke and said he meant his empty plate, but the girl told him to stop pointing. Theo mentally called that little punk a real piece of work. Now that His Highness was done eating, he could leave, because Azarin had a lot to talk about with his childhood friend. But the Archduke snapped back, saying he was staying. He ordered Euless to bring him seconds. The Archduke wasn't about to leave those two alone, so he was going to keep eating until he was stuffed to the gills. Yuna explained that Theo just really loves to eat a lot. She said she'd missed everyone so much during that time. Her friend, all smiles, confessed he'd been missing her like crazy. Said Yuna's been stuck in his head day and night. Azarim was kicking himself for ever letting her go. The Archduke gripped his fork, practically bending it out of shape, while Yuna chirped that she was doing just fine here. She'd already made two good friends, Ray and Malin, and his lordship's secretary Euless was always ready to lend a hand. And Theo was being super nice to her, too. Yuna couldn't even begin to express how grateful she was. Theo just said it was no big deal. No need to thank him. And if she needed anything, he'd take care of it, no problem. Azarim said he was glad to hear his lordship was treating Yuna well. The Archduke realized there was more to this visit than met the eye. Yuna's friend revealed that if it weren't for the Lord of the North, she would have been engaged to him, since a marriage between heirs is only natural. Theo shot back that in his language, they call that total BS. It's an expression they use to describe something completely pointless. Frowning, Yuna asked her childhood friend, totally ticked off, why he'd even bring that up at the dinner table. She had no idea what got into him. Azarim apologized and explained he just wanted to test him. Speaking in another language, the guy told his friend that it was all necessary to see what he was really made of. Yuna wanted to be a good wife to Theo, but this situation was super awkward. Azarim looked down and apologized. The joke went way too far. He thanked Theo for taking care of Yuna, and the tense Archduke replied that it was part of his duty as her husband. Yuna always said she was into guys she could count on. It was getting pretty late, so Theo suggested they wrap up dinner. Azarin told his friend he was already missing the days when they'd just chat about anything and everything. But Theo let him know the guest rooms were in another part of the building. Yuna's friend was about to say he'd just crash at her place, but the Lord immediately shut that down. The main girl suggested to her friend that they talk tomorrow. Theo was getting more and more pissed off by the whole thing. After a while, he slammed a bottle of his most expensive booze on the table. This dude was already getting on his last nerve. He was dreading the thought of Yuna getting upset and heading home. Out of nowhere, Archduke Phoenix heard a tink, like someone tossed a pebble at the window, and he tensed up. It was Yuna, waving at him. Turns out, she'd forgotten to give him something. It was tea made from yassa leaves. Theo was surprised Yuna came all this way just for that, and she said she really wanted him to be the first to try it. Yuna thanked him for being so understanding with Azarim earlier. The Archduke smiled and promised he'd definitely try the tea. Deep in the night, Azarim was walking down the hallway. He froze as soon as a voice behind him ordered him to halt. The Archduke, with a gaze cold enough to scare the pants off anyone, asked Azarim where he thought he was going so late. The guy made it clear he didn't give anyone permission to use his first name. And just like that, Azarin showed his true colors. The Archduke repeated his question, and Azarin immediately answered that he couldn't sleep, so he wanted to see Yuna right now. Theo asked, his voice like ice. When he was planning on heading home, Azarin casually replied that he'd only planned on seeing Yuna and then immediately leaving the mainland. But now he realized he needed to stick around for a bit longer. The Archduke reminded him that an heir shouldn't be away from his lands for so long, but Azarin revealed he only became the heir in the first place because he wanted to marry Yuna. He felt bad that his beloved had to marry someone like the Archduke of the North, who wanted to control everything through brute force. Azarin was furious that it was Theo who offered magical stones in exchange for a wife. The Archduke smirked, reminding them they agreed to this themselves. But the brunette was against it from the start. That Delkin always seemed like a snake to him, but in the end, Azarim let Yuna leave the house himself, so he couldn't whine about it now. Azarim concluded that the Archduke was just using their need and desperation as an excuse to keep Yuna here. Now the brunette understood why marriage was the main condition. But the Archduke declared he'd only let him leave alive because of her. Azarim exclaimed that they'd meet on the training grounds tomorrow, and Yuna couldn't know about it under any circumstances. Back in the village, Azarim was a real ladies' man. The main character asked Malin if his grace looked like a real aristocrat. The personal maid was taken aback by the question. Yuna was all starry-eyed, saying his lordship was so dashing, with those handsome, aristocratic features. But Malin knew the Archduke from a slightly different angle. Suddenly, she asked where Ray was, and Yuna replied that she'd be a little late today. Word is, there's some kind of big event going down at the training arena, so she's over there right now. The knights crowded around Azarim, peppering him with questions. The guy was spinning them tales about how he took down a bear with just a dagger. Azarim added that he'd been chatting with the maids, who, as it turns out, are pretty interested in the knights. He promised to hook them up if they were interested. The Archduke asked coldly why they weren't training. Azarim told his lordship that he was late, and admitted he was starting to think he wasn't coming at all. Without a word, Theo tossed his opponent the wooden sword. He suggested Azarim should be grateful it wasn't the real deal. The knights immediately started whispering. His grace hadn't sparred in ages, but this kid was full of himself. Azarim got into a fighting stance and asked his opponent why he was scared. But Theo calmly replied he was just figuring out how to win without leaving him totally wrecked. The brunette gripped his sword tighter. Those words got under his skin. He wanted to see how the Archduke would talk then, and charged in, confident he'd win. But Theo easily dodged. Then Azarim swung again, but Theo blocked it. The Archduke's eyes widened as his opponent, with a smug grin, told him Yuna wouldn't be happy in this situation. A cold-hearted bastard like that had no business being near her. Those words made Theo drop his guard, and Azarim saw his chance to nail him in the side. The guy thought keeping Yuna in a freezing place like this was just plain wrong. But the Archduke just calmly asked his opponent if he was done flapping his gums, or if he had anything else to say. Theo suggested they wrap this up quick. Rough up the brunette a little and let him go. Then he was the one who went on the offensive. He announced that 3 hits should do the trick. A split second later, Azarim crashed to the ground. He was stunned when the wooden sword shattered in his hands, which meant the duel was over, and he'd lost. The Archduke declared that was enough. Just like Azarin thought, this guy's got some seriously unreal power. He wanted his grace to reach out, but Theo just coldly turned away, making it clear he couldn't care less. Azarin got to his feet and announced he was heading to Yuna. Seeing the Archduke's displeased look, the brunette asked if he was going to stop him. Eulis burst into the office and anxiously asked Theo if he was okay. The advisor was told that his lordship was in the training arena, and his opponent got what was coming to him. Eulis freaked out when he saw blood on his lord's hand, but the Archduke calmly told him to chill. Azarin wasn't bad, and that wasn't just empty boasting. He's fast and knows how to throw his opponent off balance. The Archduke actually let him get a couple of hits in before finally knocking the weapon out of his hands. Theo got Yuna way too easy, so that brunette deserves a consolation prize. Azarim's words flashed through the dark-haired guy's head. All those complaints were BS, but he still ain't letting Yuna go. If the brunette wants to see his precious darling, he can go look all he wants. Azarim froze, realizing the Archduke is seriously off his rocker. Theo was chilling in his office, reading a document. He instantly winced from a sharp pain that suddenly shot through his left arm, like a blade stabbing right through him. Maybe he really shouldn't hold back and just beat the living daylights out of him. Azarim burst into the office, yelling that he couldn't see Yuna because of him. But Theo just calmly reminded him about basic manners. He smirked, brushing off the brunette's sulk. Was he really bent out of shape over a little dressing down? Nah, he knew it was something else. The Archduke explained that his room and Yuna's were connected by a bridge, so Azarim would have to deal with him every time. The brunette, face twisted with displeasure, exclaimed indignantly that he'd suspected all along he was keeping Yuna locked up in a tower. Yuna suddenly walked into the study. She was surprised to see Azarim there. The main character told the Archduke something awful had happened. The staircase to her room had literally collapsed, but Theo reassured her, saying it was all the workers' fault. The collapse happened while Yuna was cleaning on the first floor. The Archduke told her not to even think it was her fault, because he should have checked the tower's condition more carefully. The danger was already in the rearview mirror, though. Yuna asked her buddy what they were talking about with the Archduke. She totally called it. Those two would hit it off. Just one night and they're practically best buds. Azarim was floored the second his lord confirmed it. Yuna apologized for interrupting and said she was heading out. When the Archduke asked, all flustered, where she was going, the main character said she and Malin were going to work in the garden today. Even though the servants could handle it, Yuna dug it. Out of the blue, Azarim volunteered to help. Hearing that, the Archduke confidently announced he'd tag along too. He smirked and told the brunette that he could use a little exercise like that as well. Mylene suggested a spot to the lady where she could plant some flowers. The main character asked the two young guys if they could put a tea table there. They both jumped on board with the idea at the same time. But then they shot each other death glares. Ray joined them, apologizing to her ladyship for being so late getting back from the training grounds. Yuna complimented the girl, saying the uniform really suited her. Ray remembered that the lady had asked for some help with something. Suddenly, she saw the Archduke pulling weeds and was floored by the unexpected sight. Yuna explained that Theo and Azarin had volunteered to help her out. Ray looked at the newcomer, who was seriously good in a fight. She was absolutely furious that this guy dared to hurt the master of this castle, plus she just hated show-offs. The brunette jumped to his feet as soon as he saw Ray. He'd seen her in the training arena and was seriously impressed. The young woman's cheeks flushed red from the unexpected compliment from the conceited outsider. Malin, with a sly grin, told Ray not to just stand there like a statue. She grabbed an axe, but Yuna stopped her and reminded her that there were two young men here who could handle it. The main character immediately headed over to the guys. She pointed at the stumps and asked them to dig them out. They needed to clear the area for new plants, so the men immediately agreed to help without a second thought. Theo grabbed the axe, but his hand suddenly flared up with pain. Azarim wondered if he was already having trouble. The Archduke told the brunette to give it a shot himself, and the guy replied he'd chopped down at least 100 trees back on Rua. He swung, but instantly felt a pain in his left side. The axe barely grazed the stump in the end. Ray walked up to him and said, with a bit of doubt, that she'd be better off doing it herself. With one clean, confident swing, packed with power, the girl easily split the thick stump in half. Yuna was amazed by Ray's strength. The girl suggested His Grace leave it to her, but Theo decided to handle it himself. He had to outdo the brunette no matter what, so that stump just had to crack right in front of Yuna. He did manage to chip the stump a little at least. Theo instantly switched to standby mode, waiting for Yuna to praise him. But instead, she walked up to him, looking worried, and said he looked pale and his hands were freezing. Yuna told the maids they could finish up later. The main character suggested Theo go lie down. A slight blush immediately crept onto the Archduke's face, and even though he appreciated the concern, Yuna shouldn't worry. Out of nowhere, Azarin suggested a walk with her. Theo was about to tag along, but she told him to get some rest. Yuna promised they wouldn't be long, and Azarin added that His Grace really needed to take it easy. Theo immediately grabbed her hand. In a pitiful voice, he said he felt absolutely terrible. The Archduke's in a hurry, wants Yuna to personally brew him her special herbal tea. She promised she'd be right back. Then she took a walk with her friend. Theo immediately called Ray over. The Lord ordered him to tail them, wanted to know everything they were talking about, and honestly, she wasn't even surprised. Hard to swallow that Azarin's here on some friendly visit. That's why Theo was wondering what that brunette was really up to. Everything was blooming here despite the cold, and Yuna asked her childhood friend if he didn't think it was kinda weird. But it was all thanks to the magic stones. Yuna mentioned that the river even freezes over here in winter. Azarim clocked those spies tailing them right away, and he had a pretty good idea who sent them. He apologized for being late, saying he was just checking out the scenery. Yuna admitted that walks in nature brought her peace. Azurim remembered how Yuna loved to wander around, even when they were just little kids without a care in the world. Those walks they took together meant the world to him. But when winter hit, those days were over. Azurim kept telling himself it was the only way to save the island, but it still pissed him off. Out of nowhere, they came up to a hunting lodge. The brunette suggested they head inside and talk without anyone eavesdropping. The main character wondered if they hadn't been alone the whole time. Azurim suggested they speak in the language of Rua, since they were alone, and Yuna happily agreed. The brunette told her that Suma won the tournament. He was bummed he couldn't make it to the tournament in person. Then he started doing an impression of his dad, who he had to help instead of going. Yuna asked how her dad was doing these days. Azurim said that since she left, he barely leaves the house. The main character asked her friend to tell him she's doing okay, as soon as he gets back to Rue Island. But Azurim refused, saying she'd tell him herself. But Delkin told Yuna they needed to wait at least a goal, so it didn't look like a setup to grab the magic stones. The brunette told her she didn't need to be here anymore. He found another way. Eulis knocked on his lord's office door and announced his arrival. The Archduke, completely shirtless, immediately turned to his advisor and asked where Yuna was right now. Eulis was surprised the wound had healed so quickly. Theo frowned when he learned the girl had already been back for a while. The advisor confessed that he'd personally asked the lady to come later because he thought his grace was already asleep. The Archduke asked if there was any news from the shadows. Eulis said they chatted a bit about island news and then went into his lordship's hunting lodge. Theo angrily demanded what the heck they were doing there. The advisor explained, flustered, that they just got a little chilly. They were holed up in the cabin for ages, talking about something. But it was all in Rue, so who knows what they said. Shadow said Azurim was definitely trying to talk the girl into something. The main girl was just lying on the bed, staring up at the ceiling. Then she heard her childhood friend's voice in her head, telling her he'd found another way for her to get back home. He told her to remember the snow woman from the island legends. Her hair was as white as snow. There was this one legend. If the snow woman drinks water from the river of memories, she can get her real power back and save the island from disaster. A lot of people on the island thought Yuna looked like that woman, but she pointed out that nobody knows where that river is. But Azurim actually managed to find her. The holy water fountain in that particular temple, the description of it, sounded a hell of a lot like the river of memories, glowing with a blue light. Yuna, surprised, asked how he figured that out. He overheard it in some local chatter. Even though they couldn't completely trust them, the guy didn't see any other way to save the island. And he wasn't about to let Yuna get pushed around. The heroine really wanted to help her people, so she promised she'd ask Theo to let her go to that temple. Azurim's face lit up instantly, and he thanked Yuna for backing his idea without hesitation. But the guy asked her not to spill the beans about the Ruka legends to outsiders. It'd be awesome if Azurim was right, though. Then the island would have been saved from the cold, and everything would have been golden. Dad could have bounced back, and the main girl could have lived happily ever after with Theo. If the deal falls through, they could just be a regular couple. The girl got lost in her daydreams. But then it hit her. The promise she made to the Archduke that morning. She bolted to see him. It was already late, and Theo might be asleep. But Yuna gave her word, so she had to follow through. The main girl decided to quickly brew some fragrant tea and head back to her room. She opened the door and immediately bumped into someone. Turns out it was Theo, still wide awake. Yuna totally didn't expect he'd been waiting for her the whole time and immediately apologized, explaining she just lost track of time. She was really hoping he wasn't mad at her right now. The two sat down facing each other. Theo cursed under his breath because he'd been too busy staring at her gorgeous face and completely forgot he was supposed to say something. Right now, Yuna's like a little bird with droopy wings, so cute. The young woman perked up as soon as the guy said he was actually just about to go for a walk when she came in. He was feeling pretty sluggish after such a long nap, so he figured he'd take a stroll. Yuna was happy to hear that the Lord was doing okay now. Theo decided to ask how the walk went, and the main character said they got back early, before dark. Theo's jaw tightened when Yuna added that it was great catching up with Azurim after so long. Out of the blue, she asked if they could check out the temple up north. Azurim said he'd be down to see it. Theo explained that getting into the local goddess temple wasn't going to be a walk in the park. Getting permission could take forever. Yuna was only interested in the bio temple, so the dark-haired dude didn't want to risk it. But she suggested they wait. Theo jumped when he learned Azurim was planning to ship out right after seeing the temple, but now he'd have to stick around. In other words, this son of a gun's gonna bail if Theo shows him the temple. The Lord stood up fast and declared they were hitting the temple ASAP, like tomorrow. Yuna reminded him that he said it would take a long time, but the Archduke promised to just bust down the gates if they didn't open up. Right then, Theo was dead serious. He plastered on a big smile and explained it was all because Azurin was their honored guest. The next day, Theo was looking sharp, all decked out. The secretary held out a tray to the Lord and asked him to take it. It's for her ladyship to wear during prayer. Theo immediately thought, Yuna would look great in this during prayer, like a little snowbird all wrapped up in silk. While the Archduke was picturing that, Azurin knocked on the door. Seeing the Lord's dark look, the brunette, dressed in a sacred robe from the Bayon Empire, reminded him, Hey, I did knock, you know. The man explained that he came to see Yuna, so he asked not to be turned away this time. Theo had to agree, but on the condition that he go too. The man approached Yuna's room and knocked on the door. Julius's younger sister appeared on the threshold. Seeing his lordship, the girl allowed him to enter. Yuna, dressed in a beautiful white and blue sacred robe, was happy to see that Theo and Azurin had decided to visit her together. Both guys were totally mesmerized by how gorgeous she looked. The heroine blushed, admitting it was her first time wearing the sacred robe, so she felt a little out of her element. Theo came up from behind and, figuring she'd freeze on the way to the temple, threw a cloak over her shoulders. Yuna said the robe was surprisingly warm for how thin it was, thanks to some magic stone dust, but Theo wasn't really listening. Looking around, Azurim remarked that Yuna's room was pretty cramped compared to the Archduke's chambers. She replied that she felt comfortable there, but the brunette was more worried about how they were treating her in this place. Yuna explained that she chose to stay there, and then the hero asked if she was afraid of being alone in a room with the Archduke. I mean, everyone here's scared of him. Even the servants keep their distance. The heroine told Azarim to stop talking like that, since Theo had organized this whole trip just for him. The brunette explained that he was just saying what everyone else was thinking, and apologized if he'd offended anyone. They better haul ass to the temple now. After looking at Theo, the young woman apologized for Azarim's behavior, but the Archduke told her not to sweat it. Her buddy's gonna be shipping out soon anyway. Before long, our heroes arrived at the Phoenix Temple. Azarim remarked that this temple was pretty nice, and Yuna happily agreed. But suddenly, the high priest of the Phoenix Daphne Temple rushed up to them. Lambros, out of breath, asked his lordship in confusion what brought him to their humble abode. Everyone knows the Lord's disdain for the temple. The Lord asked sternly if he was forbidden, but the high priest replied in a trembling voice that that wasn't the case at all. In that case, Theo asked him to escort the Archduchess right away. Seeing the surprise and confusion on Lambros's face, Theo snapped, Do I need to spell it out for you? The Storm Eye Temple is where I'm headed. The high priest immediately bowed his head, apologizing for his blunder, and then gestured for them to enter. Lambros shifted his gaze to the Archduchess. The lady looked absolutely stunning, like the goddess Daphne herself had descended from the heavens and was standing right there. Theo knew exactly what the high priest was thinking, so he ordered him to keep his mouth shut. Suddenly, the Lord remembered something important. The man draped a snow-white shawl over Yuna's head, explaining that local women cover their heads during prayer. The girl waved goodbye and promised to be back soon, and Theo promised to wait for her right there. As soon as the high priest and the Archduchess were gone, the men were left alone. Theo broke the silence first, asking Azarim if the temple had been his goal from the start. The brunette didn't understand what his grace was talking about, so the Archduke explained he'd been tracking his route from Rui to Phoenix. Turns out, Azarim hung around the Bio Empire for quite a while. Looks like Delkin took good care of him. Good enough that the brunette could afford a ridiculously expensive robe. Delcan wasn't surprised by the investigation, but spying on him isn't enough for the Archduke. Because Delkin came to see Yuna, but Theo figured that was just a convenient excuse. The brunette replied cryptically, saying he knew Yuna well. She wouldn't be happy in this place. She'd be better off marrying him. Theo said harshly that he didn't give a damn what Azarim spent Delkin's money on, or why he came. He just wanted to stop listening to the brunette whine about his unrequited love. It was sickening. Losing it, Azarim yelled that he'd found out a few things about his grace too. They say the Archduke's a real monster. Whole countries wiped off the map because of his rampages. People left with nothing. No sooner did Azarim ask if his bloodlust woke up after his mother died, than Theo grabbed him by the collar and hauled him up. Azarim snidely asked if Yuna knew about this side of his highness. Theo, furious, told the jerk to shut his damn mouth. Just then, a terrified Yuna appeared in the doorway, catching them in the act. She had no idea what was going on. The young woman ordered Theo to stop immediately and let Azarim go. The Archduke obeyed, and Yuna rushed over to her friend, who was coughing hard, trying to catch his breath. All the while, Theo watched as the girl fussed over Azarim, seeing how he was hurt, even bruised. Unable to watch any longer, the Lord headed for the exit. I had to stop, though, 'cause Azarim was all, "Isn't your highness gonna apologize or something?" He was just looking out for Yuna, after all. But the door slammed shut, and the Archduke just walked off in silence. Azarim reached for her hand, wanting to suggest they get away from this monster, but Yuna pulled away. She straight up asked him why he was lying. 'Cause she heard everything. The brunette froze, totally caught off guard. He called out, "Yuna!" as she headed for the exit, but she told him not to call her that. He didn't have the right. And then she dropped this bomb. Even if nothing had happened to the island, she still wouldn't have married him. The door slammed, and Azarim cursed under his breath. The temple staff started freaking out when they saw the Archduke storming down the hall, looking like a thundercloud. The guy was pissed that he fell for such a cheap trick so easily. Yuna looked like she was completely done with Theo, like she could never forgive him. Theo slammed his fist into the wall, hard. He was sure she was scared of him now. The thought of Yuna dumping him started to freak him out. But deep down, he knew it was probably for the best. Sooner or later, Yuna would have seen the real him anyway. Even if she wanted to run, Theo wasn't letting her go. Even if it meant she'd never smile again. The door burst open, and Yuna stood there, demanding to know what the hell Theo was doing. Yeah, it'd be better if she was angry. Then it'd be easy for the Archduke to just lock Yuna up and not feel a thing. But instead of being scared, Yuna grabbed his hand and said, "Theo should have really let Azarim have it." Seeing the Archduke's wounded hand, the young woman got worried and suggested they go to a doctor right away. Theo said it wasn't necessary, but Yuna took it as if the Lord was afraid of doctors. The girl confessed she used to be scared of them too. But if he wants to get better fast, he's gotta be brave. Yuna's hand was really warm. Theo explained that he could just see a priest. It'd be faster than going to a doctor. The young girl was happy and suggested they head over there as soon as possible. Seeing Yuna's smile, a slight blush crept onto the Archduke's face, and he smiled too, letting the girl pull him along. The priest jumped when the door burst open, and his lordship appeared with the Archduchess. Theo said he'd appreciate it if they could have a moment alone. The temple servant was stunned by the request, so the Archduke had to repeat himself, more sternly, to get him to scram. The priest booked it out of here, and Yuna was all confused like, "Why'd you send him away, Theo?" The guy calmed her down, saying it wasn't the priest healing him, it was the medicine itself. Yuna suggested Theo take a seat, 'cause they needed to wipe off all the blood before using the stuff. Thing is, the Archduke's gonna have to grit his teeth a little. This cuts deeper than it looks. Theo's face went bright red the second Yuna got close and started blowing on his hand. The dude totally turned away, but she took it like he was lying about not being in pain. He told her it wasn't like that, and just said she only needed to dab a little bit on the wound. Thanks to his instructions, Yuna got it exactly right. The wound healed up like magic, 'cause this medicine's got traces of divine power in it. Now that Theo's wound was taken care of, he asked Yuna to give him her hand. She got a little dirty because of him too. With all the tenderness and care in the world, the young man started wiping Yuna's hand with a cloth, a gentle smile shining on his face. She confessed that she'd actually heard the whole conversation because she'd stepped out of the prayer room to grab a guidebook. She felt bad that Azarin had been so rude to the Archduke, but Theo replied that she shouldn't worry about it. What happened can just be chalked up to a misunderstanding. On the contrary, Theo himself should offer his apologies. The young woman laughed and asked what Theo meant by that. The Archduke was just about to explain everything when the door suddenly burst open, and Azarin appeared in the doorway. Whatever happened, the brunette couldn't understand how Yuna could just walk away like that. Azarin recoiled the moment the young woman demanded he apologize first. The brunette apologized to Yuna, suggested they wrap things up and leave, but she said she wasn't the one who needed the apology. Azarim needs to apologize to her husband, and he needs to do it right. Theo's heart started pounding, and he was thrilled inside, since she called him her husband. Reluctantly, the brunette lowered his head and apologized to the Archduke, adding that he'd crossed a line. Unable to hide his smile after Yuna's words, Theo agreed to accept the apology. Azarim thanked him for his mercy, but the Archduke didn't care about that at all, because Yuna herself had called him her husband. Just then, voices could be heard outside the door. The door burst open, and Eulis appeared on the threshold, with the high priest trying his best to hold him back. Theo asked, confused, what was going on. Apparently, according to the priests, the holy water spring in the temple had instantly dried up. There are 5 Daphne temples on the entire continent. Each region's temple has its own architecture and unique features, but they all share one thing in common. They receive holy water from the main temple, which always has the same temperature, and its source is inexhaustible. Its magical properties are considered proof that the goddess Daphne still protects their world. About 3 months ago, the holy water began to gradually decrease, and eventually the source completely dried up. If people find out about this, everyone will think that the goddess Daphne has abandoned the north, so the holy water was replaced with regular water. But unlike real holy water, its quantity constantly decreased, which is why the priests tried to restrict access to the temple. Theo remembered that Yuna arrived in Phoenix 3 months ago. Lambros promised that they would definitely restore the holy water. They had already sent a priest into the eye of the storm. They just needed to wait for him. The Lord asked about affairs in the other temples, and the high priest replied that their temple was independent of the Bio Empire and did not contact other temples. If this same problem's popping up in other temples, the Empire might just fast-track getting their hands on the saint's power. Theo took a knee in front of Lambros and said he should already know what's in the sacred text. The priest nodded, and then the Archduke asked if he thought the Archduchess could be the saint. Theo figured the high priest had already picked up on the similarities. The saint, she's a messenger of the goddess herself, her embodiment. But since the goddess Daphne's already walked into our world, a saint just plain can't exist. After hearing Lambros out, Theo told him they'd let what happened slide, but only under one condition. If any of the temples reach out to them, he needs to let them know immediately. Back at the North Archduke's palace, the heroes sat down for a meal. No holy water, so that trip to the temple was a total bust. Azurim couldn't even overhear what the Archduke of the North was saying to the high priest. But there was something even worse. Looks like Yuna's planning on sticking around. The young girl was stoked to see that the wound on Theo's arm had completely healed. The Lord replied that the temple's medicine was super effective, and right then, Azurim spoke up, saying he wanted to know why the holy water had vanished. Finally, this dude's showing some basic manners. Theo said that according to the priests, there was a problem with the storage method, and they'd be back in business with the holy water in about 3 months. But the whole thing felt super fishy. Azurim was saying he just wanted to check out the temple, but something about that holy water really had this guy hooked. The brunette explained that he'd just heard about its health benefits, so he was curious, that's all. Anyway, he's leaving tomorrow. Theo said, dripping with sarcasm, that he was so bummed, since he didn't get nearly enough quality time with their esteemed guest. Azurim mentally gritted his teeth, trying not to snap back. The brunette smiled at Yuna, saying he was really sorry to have bothered her, and that he couldn't be of any help. The champagne cork popped with a whoosh, shooting up and leaving a trail of bubbles. Theo was stoked that this jerk was finally bailing. Now no one can compete for Yuna's attention, except for him. The secretary came in and apologized to Milord for barging in. He noticed the bottle and reminded his boss that he doesn't like champagne, because it's too weak. Theo agreed, but added it was perfect for a celebration, and Euless quickly caught on. The secretary apologized for pulling him away from the party, but they had an urgent matter that needed his attention. He held out an envelope to his lord and asked him to take a look. It was about the Magic Stone Festival down south. Apparently, they've discovered a new vein down south, and the locals are holding a festival in gratitude to the goddess Daphne. The Archduke absolutely has to visit. Circumstances have arisen that require a trip south to Servan. They managed to find the priest Delkin met with and even secretly make contact with him. They can meet in Servan to talk. Theo guessed that this concerned the holy water. The Empire is watching the Archduke's moves, so the festival is the perfect excuse to head south. Theo remembered that Camilla would be there. Last time they met, she straight up slapped the Archduke, but now she's barely seen in public. Didn't matter one bit. Theo told his secretary to start getting everything ready for the trip. The next day, Yuna came out to see her friend off. It would have been cool if Azurin could have stayed longer, but the guy's been away from home long enough as it is. The hero used to think the North was just a frozen wasteland, but turns out the food's decent and the beds are comfy. All right, this is definitely goodbye time. But then Azurin noticed Yuna was holding something. It was a small stack of letters. The girl asked her friend to give them to her dad as soon as he got back home. Yuna's been writing him a letter every single day since she got here. Just like Azarin thought, Yuna misses Rue. Just then, the Archduke of the North stepped outside. The guy announced he'd packed up some magic stones as a gift, a whole bunch of them, but he managed to get it all sorted. Reluctantly, Azarin thanked him for the present. Then, the brunette walked over to the young woman. He gave her a tight hug, which immediately set Theo off, and thanked Yuna for the warm welcome. Azurin hoped they'd see each other again soon. The main girl admitted she wanted that too. After that, the brunette hopped into the carriage and took off. First things first, Azurin's heading to Bayo. Gotta find the guy who leaked the info about the holy water. Touching the girl's letters, the man apologized to Yuna. He'll pass them on someday, just not right now. Sitting at the table and sipping her tea, Yuna sighed heavily. The Archduke of the North noticed immediately and asked the young woman, all worried. What was wrong? He probably shouldn't have asked, because it turns out Yuna was worried she'd been too cold towards Azurim. Theo started to doubt his decision when he decided not to, permanently deal with that son of a gun. The man ordered them to come in. The secretary immediately opened the door, and the head chef appeared on the threshold, apologizing to the aristocrats for interrupting their conversation. Yuna's face lit up with delight the second she saw the dessert. Just looking at it made you want to devour every last crumb. This dessert had chestnuts added. Theo specifically ordered this dish based on the chef's recommendation. Without wasting a second, the girl rushed to try the dish. The bite was so soft, it just melted in her mouth, creating an unforgettable sensation of pure bliss. Yuna immediately exclaimed that his lordship's chef was a true master of his craft. Theo smiled, secretly deciding to give him a raise. Setting his cup down, the Archduke of the North informed Yuna that he was leaving for the south in a few days. Something really important came up, so he'd probably be gone for at least 2 weeks. Theo asked if she'd be okay without him, secretly hoping she'd ask to come along. But the girl just realized once again that the Archduke was a very important man, so she shouldn't interfere with his duties. Yuna confidently declared that if Ray and Malin helped her, she'd be able to handle anything. There was definitely no need to worry about her. The main character wished the guy well on his journey, which was totally not what he was expecting to hear. David noticed the Archduke's wound had healed up nicely, not even a scar left. That first aid stuff really worked. Now, the physical therapist was wondering if the Archduke had any other health complaints. Theo announced that he'd gotten a pet squirrel. Last time it was a bird, and now it's a snow squirrel. Super cute and pretty. You can't take your eyes off it. But the guy was really worried it would run away. If he had his way, the Archduke would lock it in a cage and keep everyone away, 'cause that's how he'd stop the squirrel from escaping. David asked His Grace, kinda confused, if the squirrel actually wanted to escape. Maybe it's somehow showing that it's not happy, or has already tried to escape, but nothing like that's happened. In that case, don't jump to conclusions. Maybe everything's fine with the Archduke as it is. The boss hasn't felt joy in so long, he's ready to protect this new happiness at any cost. It's got him worried sick that it could all vanish. The only way out of this is to let the squirrel know who's boss. First, you gotta build a connection. Try praising the squirrel, hand-feeding it, petting its head. David still hasn't caught on that we're not just talking about a squirrel here. Meanwhile, the therapist kept going, saying after a while the squirrel will see the Archduke as its master and follow him everywhere. Then he won't have anything to worry about. Theo wrote down every word the doctor said. Looks like His Highness is finally learning to recognize emotions. He just needs to figure out how to control them. And then Theo can fully get his humanity back. Humming a little tune to herself, Yuna was getting ready for bed. Milan asked her mistress if something good had happened today. Yuna nodded, explaining that His Grace had been showering her with compliments all day, like saying she was a good eater when it came to bread. It made him happy to see she had a healthy appetite. It was only then that Theo noticed Yuna's big, round eyes, and how beautiful they were. And when they went for an evening stroll, Yuna was captivated by the hydrangeas that were still in bloom. Those flowers usually fade pretty fast, so Yuna was happy to be able to enjoy them while they lasted. Theo remarked that Yuna was really smart. Not everyone knows so much about plants, so the Archduke suggested they walk a little further. Yuna happily agreed to his suggestion, and then they went back to the estate and ate chestnut cake together. And while Yuna was eating, the master kept praising her. Milan found it a little hard to imagine the master showering someone with so many compliments, but it meant that his lordship really liked the lady. The Archduke has changed a lot lately because of the lady. He barely used to leave his study, and walks were totally out of the question. Plus, his lordship used to hit the bottle pretty hard every day. All in all, it's true what they say. Marriage can really straighten a guy out. Yuna caught herself thinking that she wanted to do even more for Theo. He was her husband after all. The main character turned to Maylene, saying that while his lordship was away, she wanted to get some things done. First off, the lawns need weeding. But that's not all, not by a long shot. The young woman was pulled away from her story by the maids, who were gushing over a fluffy little critter. Yuna walked over to the maids to see what they were up to. The girls immediately got flustered and greeted her ladyship. One of the maids explained it was a kitten who'd lost its mom, and sometimes they come by to play with it. They weren't planning on keeping him or anything. The maids didn't expect her ladyship to ask if she could play with the cute little thing too. You could see pure delight and adoration in Yuna's eyes. Of course, the maids weren't against it, so they all gathered around the tiny kitty and started playing with him. The little guy was super playful and funny, but it was lunchtime, and the kitten needed to eat. The little one was eating with great pleasure the food that the castle maids brought him. The kitten was even eating sweetly. It was impossible to take one's eyes off this sight. The maid's intonation began to strongly remind the main character of something. A question immediately popped into her head. From whom had she heard it? Before getting into the carriage and leaving, Archduke Sever decided to take one last look at his castle before the trip. Eulis informed his lord that it was time for him to get in, but Theo hoped to catch a glimpse of the girl before leaving. He was just about to get in when he suddenly heard a familiar voice. An agitated Yuna hastily ran out of the majestic castle and asked his grace to wait a little. Stopping in front of the man, the heroine indignantly asked if he was really planning to just leave without even saying goodbye. Quite unexpectedly, Yuna declared that she couldn't pet Theo's head or call him a cutie. That Archduke's way too tall to be cute, handsome is more like it. Instead, the main character just straight up hugged him tight. Yuna told his grace to get back safe, 'cause she's gonna be here waiting for him. The Archduke of the North promised he'd come back in one piece. Touching the young woman's earring, he offered to bring her anything she wanted, whatever it took. Yuna pulled back a little and kind of flustered, said it must be warm down south. So she asked him to bring back some of the easiest flowers to grow. Yuna wanted to plant them in the estate's garden. Theo promised he definitely would. While he's gone, the Archduke told Yuna to spend as much money as she needed and asked her to stay put. The girl spaced out a little and said that she was planning on staying at the estate anyway. Theo was seriously stressing, so he even spilled some classified intel, told Yuna to call the Shadow Knights for backup if things got hairy. She nodded, already knowing her lord had to roll out and couldn't stick around any longer. Theo wrapped an arm around her waist and asked if they could just stand like that for a little while longer. He was desperate to spend a few more moments with her. The heroine closed her eyes, melting into the man's strong embrace. Time was up, so the Archduke had to hop in the carriage and hit the road. He hadn't even gone a few yards from the castle when he already felt like turning back home. 3 days later, Yuna, holding a little shovel, asked Ray if she didn't think it turned out awesome. The once barren garden had become beautiful because the Archduchess decided to spruce it up for the Grand Duke. Ray said his grace would definitely dig it, when suddenly a flustered Meilin came running up to them. Little sister Eulis was so winded from all that running, she was practically gasping for air. Then Meilin announced, all puffed up with pride, that the lady had received an invitation to tea from the seriously powerful Brown family. Getting an invite like that means Lady Yuna can now hit up any social event she wants. But Meilin was a little ticked off, because the invitation should have arrived way sooner. Social events are where you trade intel, so the lady can find out more about the Duke. If it could help Theo, the main character was down to go. So Yuna confidently declared that she was definitely going to this tea party. Now the three of them need to go together, so they gotta go shopping for dresses and get some gifts ready. It was the dead of night outside. The all-night tavern was empty, and the staff were starting to nod off. The innkeeper cracked one eye open, hearing the door creak. A knight stood in the doorway, demanding all the food the place had. The mustached guy told him to hold on a sec, he'd get right on it. Theo knew it probably looked like they hadn't eaten in days, but it was his call to cross the mountains. The knight's riding point were beat, so this was their chance to crash before hitting the road again at dawn. The Archduke himself skipped dinner and went straight to his room. The secretary thought it was weird. He couldn't believe his grace was that wiped out. Theo quickly shrugged off his outer layers. He'd left a message for Ray before they took off, so Yuna should have checked the link stone by now. The man sat on the bed and cleared his throat. Then, talking into the green orb, he asked Yuna if she could hear him. The connection stone instantly lit up, and a familiar, gentle voice, almost painful in its clarity, asked how to use the thing. Yuna wasn't sure if the device was even working, so the Archduke called out her name. The young woman was ecstatic. It felt like the man was right next to her, talking directly to her. Theo explained that it was called a connection stone, made from a special magic crystal. Yuna immediately asked if it was super expensive, and the Archduke fibbed, saying it wasn't a big deal. Deciding to change the subject, Theo asked what she'd been up to that day. The main character happily recounted that she'd received an invitation to a tea party from the Brown family. The Archduke knew that that family traded magic stones with the Bio Empire. They never went against his wishes. Yuna said she was thinking of baking chestnut pies to give to the lady. The guy was convinced, if she was cooking, whatever she made would be mind-blowing. The main girl thanked Theo and decided to ask him what he'd been up to today. She found out the Archduke of the North had been riding and just got to the inn to chill. The mountains weren't hard to cross, and Yuna already pictured how awesome the scenery must be. The guy gave a weird answer like, "Yeah, probably," and Yuna figured he was totally wiped out. So she told the Archduke to get some rest and quickly signed off, making Theo yell out, confused. He asked her to wait, saying he still had a ton he wanted to talk to her about. No matter how beat his lordship was, Eulis thought he had to eat, so he brought him food himself. As he got to the door, he suddenly heard his lordship's voice. The secretary was lost, 'cause his lordship should definitely be in the room all by himself right now. Out of nowhere, the boss just asks some girl what she's wearing right now. Eulis was already thinking he must have misheard, 'cause there's no way Lord Theo would say something like that. But then his lordship straight up announces that he's underdressed. Eulis's mind instantly conjures up an image of the boss practically naked, and the secretary's thinking, what in the world is he doing? Yuna froze solid, her cheeks flaming red the second she heard Theo was practically bare. The guy rushed to clear things up, explaining he'd just loosened up a bit, 'cause it was so freaking hot. It was way warmer here than back up north. But the truth is, Theo was wearing thin stuff, and in the moonlight, his muscles were, pretty visible. Of course, Yuna wasn't secretly checking out his physique. Thoughts the main character usually keeps to herself just kinda slipped out. Yuna casually mentioned that, because it gets so hot in the attic, she sometimes sleeps without her pajamas too. Theo went beet red, hearing his wife sleeps naked and picturing the whole thing. Feathers from the pillow immediately went flying everywhere. Hearing the weird noise, Yuna anxiously asked what the heck was going on. After ripping a hole in the pillow, Theo said that it was nothing to worry about. Just then, the secretary walked into the room and asked his lordship what he was even doing. Yuna knew instantly from the voice that it was Eulis. Theo quickly told the girl that it was a little noisy here, so she could go ahead and rest, and he'd get in touch later. Only now did Eulis realize that the master had been holding the communication stone the whole time. The crazy thing is, that's a super valuable artifact, and the Archduke's using it to chat with the missus. What if war breaks out and these things become scarce? Only the imperial family or the highest nobility can afford something this expensive, and the Archduke's wasting it on some dumb scheme. Eulis swiped the artifact, totally clueless that Theo had brought 3 connection stones along just in case. But what really ticked off the secretary was that his boss wasn't even listening to him. The next morning, in the dining hall of the Archduke of the North's castle, Chef Hans informed the lady that her dish was ready, and Ray warned her Grace not to burn herself. Taking every precaution, Yuna's personal maid took her creations out of the oven. Ray's pastries had perfect flaky crusts. Her Grace's pie was also excellent, so Hans suggested everyone try a slice. Yuna suggested inviting the other servants to join the tasting. The main character figured they needed an honest opinion. Everyone loved the idea, so Maylene said she'd call everyone over right now. A little later, Yuna thanked everyone for showing up. She asked everyone to try the chestnut pie and give their honest feedback. The main character didn't want to be left out, so she decided to try a piece of her own creation too. Against all expectations, the pie turned out super salty, but the other maids actually liked it. The flavor was pretty good, and the crispy crust was charming. The main character wasn't expecting to hear that. They probably don't know what chestnut pie is supposed to taste like, since it's their first time trying it. Desserts like that are pretty pricey. Servants can't usually afford something like this. The main character apologized to Hans and asked if it would be possible to make chestnut pies for everyone. The head chef replied that it would be tricky, but totally doable. From now on, if any of the servants wanted dessert, Yuna asked Hans to make plenty and not worry about the cost. His Grace the Archduke himself said she could spend freely, so Yuna's taking him up on that offer. The surprised maids told her lady that she didn't have to do this for them, but the main character was adamant. They all work so hard on the estate, so everyone here deserves to eat their fill, and Yuna was looking forward to working with them all. The maids immediately started offering to help out in the garden, and just like that, the day of the tea party at Earl Braun's estate arrived. Finally, the preparations were complete. Everything looked perfect. Emily Braun, the mistress of Count Braun's estate, was certain the Grand Duchess wouldn't find a single thing to criticize. Finally, she'd get to see for herself what kind of person her Grace really was. They say that girl has snow-white hair? I mean, who even likes snow up north? Emily was dead set. Today, she'd show the Duchess who's boss. This was revenge for Giselle. The woman remembered her dear friend sobbing in front of her, unable to even speak about what happened. Today, Giselle's husband went hunting, and because of the Grand Duchess, his lordship got angry with him. Her husband just said a few words, and because of that, His Grace, the Grand Duke, grabbed him by the collar and threw him to the ground. What happened really ticked Emily off. On top of that, all of Giselle's family's magic stones were confiscated, the family was ruined, and it was all because of His Grace. Emily Brown couldn't forget how desperate her friend was in that moment. So Mrs. Brown was out for revenge. The ladies were already gathering, and they immediately noticed how beautifully the garden was decorated today. Just the sight of him is going to scare that Grand Duchess, who's basically a barbarian. The maid announced to Madame that Her Highness, the Grand Duchess, had arrived. Yuna approached the table, and with a warm smile, told Madame she was very happy to finally meet her. Every lady's jaw dropped. They were stunned to realize that was the Grand Duchess. They said she had snow-white hair, but the girl was way more beautiful than anyone here could have imagined. If the ladies just sit there and don't greet her, the Archduchess will immediately know they're hostile. But suddenly, Yuna reached out to Emily herself. The main character flashed a wide smile and introduced herself first. Emily extended her hand, a puzzled look on her face as she greeted Her Grace, the Archduchess of the North. Yuna shook the Madame's hand with energy, thanking her for the invitation. The woman then offered her guest a seat. She'd made sure to prepare a spot for her. At the very end of the table, just as Emily figured, the great lady's pride was hurt, since she got stuck with the worst seat. Yuna apologized to the madam and said she only had a small request. The heroine explained she'd come with 2 escorts, so she asked the Countess Brown to add a couple more chairs. Emily was baffled. Did the Archduchess seriously want more maids joining their tea party? Madame recognized Secretary Eulis's younger sister, but the short-haired maid was a complete stranger to her. The main character calmly explained with a smile that this was her maid, and her name was Ray. The maid told her ladyship she'd be fine, but either way, they needed to bring more gifts. Yuna told her to speak up right away if she got tired, and then they'd switch places. The Archduchess is offering her spot to the maid. Looks like she's hinting that she's not exactly thrilled with Emily's tea party. You gotta watch your back around this woman. The tea party's underway, and Madame Brown thanked everyone for accepting her invitation. She especially thanked her ladyship, who's making her debut into high society today. The lady with blue hair thought it was weird that her ladyship hadn't been invited to social events before. Now people might think the Grand Archduchess only hangs out with the big-shot ladies of the duchy. Malin looked pissed. After all, these are the women who never sent invitations in the first place. Yuna agreed with the lady. Madame Emily was the first to send her an invite, so she's super excited today. The Archduchess was visiting someone's home for the first time, and it felt like she was just hanging out with a friend. Awesome! Madame Brown thought the word friend sounded pretty good. With a sly grin, Emily asked if she could call her Royal Highness by her first name, like friends do. The main character thought that was a fantastic idea, because that's what real friends do. Now, Yuna wanted to know everyone else's names. The ladies were taken aback by the Grand Archduchess's unexpected request. The blue-haired aristocrat decided to go first, saying her name was Teresa Smith. The lady with the green hair said her name was Chloe, and the girl with the light hair and the cherry-colored ribbon introduced herself as Marie. The main character was super happy to meet them all, so she told them her name too. Emily realized that at this rate, she'd lose control of the situation, so she'd have to go with that plan after all. The woman suggested they have some tea before it got cold. Teresa Smith slowly reached for the teacup sitting between her and the Grand Duchess. But then the cup started to tip. Before the tea could spill all over Yuna, Ray managed to catch the cup, averting a total disaster. The maid asked Madame to please be more careful in the future. Teresa blushed and thanked the servant. Ray turned to Her Grace and said she'd go get the gifts she'd prepared. And Yuna nodded. Since this girl was just called Ray, Marie figured she didn't have a last name. The Archduchess revealed that Ray wasn't just a maid. She was a full-blown knight. Every lady at the table was stunned by that announcement. Yuna explained that Ray fought side by side with His Grace the Grand Duke in the war. She even received a knighthood. Chloe asked, bewildered. Why the heck this girl was working as a maid then? A knight is practically minor nobility. Malin proudly replied that Ray wanted it that way. She really loves her current job. Emily Brown, who thought she was just a regular maid, started considering offering the girl a seat. Soon Ray returned with the gifts. Though modest, Yuna had prepared a gift for each of the ladies. She personally made these chestnut pies. They looked flawless. You just wanted to devour these treats. Chloe asked in surprise if Madame actually made them herself, and Yuna nodded. With her careless words, the Grand Duchess gave them an opening, and now Emily Brown might seize the opportunity. Since Yuna herself baked this pie, Madame was practically drooling to get a taste. The other ladies decided they absolutely had to try these creations too. Emily Brown tossed a piece in her mouth, not really expecting the dessert to be anything special. The pie's kinda dry, and the chestnuts are almost overpowering, but it's actually pretty good. She snapped back to reality, remembering she was supposed to be finding flaws, not praising the grand lady's work. The main character asked her new friends what they thought of the dessert. The girls replied that they were having a little trouble getting it down. You can tell the Grand Duchess put in the effort, but the dessert's too dry, and the spices are just too much. When Malin tasted it earlier, it was amazing, so maybe it went bad on the way over here. She decided to give it a shot, and that's when she realized the dessert was totally fine. Madame Brown was bragging about how they served the most amazing cake at her wedding, the best she'd ever tasted. The ladies remembered it. Since that cake was made by a baker from the Bio Empire, the frosting had a flavor you couldn't forget. Out of nowhere, Yuna was asked what kind of cake she had at her wedding. The ladies chuckled quietly, as if just remembering that the Grand Duchess never actually had a wedding ceremony. Madame Brown got curious and wanted to know why the ceremony never happened. The main character flinched. She was really put on the spot by that question. Malin jumped up from her seat and angrily told Madame Brown to stop and not ask questions like that. But Emily was just curious, because there's no real reason why a wedding ceremony wouldn't happen, unless His Highness, the Grand Duke of the North, said he didn't want to have one. Yuna winced because Madame hit the nail right on the head. Judging by the Archduchess's reaction, Madame Brown knew her hunch was right. Their marriage was a sham. And he put on this whole grand ceremony for her. Teresa and Chloe are in a similar boat, and Marie got such a heavy ring she can barely lift her finger. Being unloved by your own husband must really suck. Mylene jumped up, furious, and demanded of Madame Brown if she wasn't taking things a little too far. The maid tried to continue, but the main character told her to stop. Emily was right. Yuna didn't get to have a real wedding with His Grace the Grand Duke, since she married him without even seeing his face. But precisely because it's a loveless marriage, the main character craved love even more. That's why she asked Emily how to win her husband's heart. Madame Brown was completely taken aback by the question. Yuna was saying she wants to get closer to His Grace, but even holding hands is a struggle. One time they went to the market together. The main character told the story, and at the end she added that she finally worked up the nerve to take his hand. The ladies were super into her story. His Grace said he'd like to go back there sometime, so he probably didn't mind the touch. Madame Brown clenched her fists and asked, all tense, what Yuna was getting at. The fact that this ice-cold Grand Duke didn't object already screams that he was head over heels, no doubt about it. Emily was totally convinced of it. The main character remembered that they even hugged each other recently. Teresa smiled and said they were moving way faster than she thought. Yuna said it was her idea too, but then she started doubting herself, and now she's not so sure. If the Archduchess didn't know, she could just be sizing up her new friends. The main character said she walked His Highness out and was the first to hug him, but then he said he wanted to stay like that a little longer. The girls started gushing after hearing that. Only now did Madame Brown realize she was reacting completely wrong. Emily was so caught up in the story of the great Archduchess that she completely forgot about getting revenge for Giselle. But maybe Yuna didn't have any bad intentions from the start. House Brown's mistress shifted her gaze to Her Highness, who was smiling as she answered another of Teresa's questions. It's hard to believe that someone so pure and innocent is capable of anything bad. Honestly, it's probably Giselle's husband's fault. The guy's got zero class. And get this, it's the first time she's actually had a chill conversation at one of these tea parties. Usually, everyone's just trying to one-up each other. The main character turned around when Ray called out to her. For some reason, the girl was lugging around 4 boxes. Ray explained that these were gifts for the ladies from His Grace, the Grand Duke of the North. Inside were the famous Armand plates, crafted by a legendary artist. They're super limited edition, only like 50 are made each year. Last night, the Grand Duke of the North ordered Ray to get the gifts ready, but she almost spaced on it. Malin was stumped how Ray could forget an order from His Grace. Then Ulysses' sister realized if Ray had brought them with the cake, the dessert would have been totally overlooked. Theo must be beat after trekking all the way down south, and he still made sure to get these gifts together. Out of the blue, Emily stood up and asked Her Grace the Archduchess if she could get some advice. Her husband never gave a damn about her at social events. The main character was surprised when Madame suddenly apologized for being so rude earlier. That cake the hostess made was seriously amazing, and all the other ladies agreed. The other ladies felt bad too, but Yuna was quick to say she had a totally awesome time. But now the ladies are talking to her like they've never met before. The main character really loved today and wasn't afraid to say so. All the ladies gathered there listened to her story with genuine interest. Then Yuna went up to Emily and asked with a smile if they were friends now. Mrs. Brown, the hostess, took the young girl's hand and thanked her for letting her be friends. Yuna suggested hosting the next meeting at her estate, and Emily said she'd be absolutely thrilled to attend. The other ladies joined them and also announced they'd be delighted to come to the Grand Duchess's tea party. It was a meeting where Yuna honestly opened her heart, and somehow she felt a lot lighter afterwards. The maids told their mistress that she'd handled everything so wisely today, and that the ladies were clearly captivated by her beauty. Yuna thought these aristocrats were the first to treat her with kindness, but Maylene exclaimed she barely held back from calling them out on their nerve. Of course, the talk about the wedding got to the main character a little, but she's glad they opened their hearts to her sincerity. The Grand Duchess of the North asked Malin and Ray what needed to be done to host the tea party at the estate. Count Woodlich heard that His Excellency, the Grand Duke, attended the festival for the first time. Theo didn't respond, just stared at the man with indifference. Earl Woodlich flinched, totally startled when the Grand Duke suddenly turned to him. Theo snapped, reminding him he'd already asked him to be brief and get to the point. The Earl just humbly asked His Highness to invest in his new venture, but the Archduke wouldn't even hear him out. He left the rest to Ulysses and just walked right out of the room. Woodlich exclaimed, asking if his lordship wasn't interested in the details, but the Archduke just coldly asked if his words hadn't been heard. Theo was incredibly busy right now, so he suggested the Earl discuss everything with his secretary. Ulysses suggested they get down to discussing the investment. Theo rushed back and immediately pulled out his comstone to finally talk to Yuna. As soon as the girl answered, the man immediately asked if today's tea party went well. The main character said she really enjoyed it. Everyone was so kind and nice to her. Theo told Yuna it's because she's the sweetest, kindest girl in the whole world. One of a kind. But she thought it was all thanks to Theo, though she was curious how he managed to get the gifts ready so fast. The Archduke just said the idea kinda popped into his head. Truth is, the second Yuna mentioned going to that tea party, His Highness sent a messenger. Looks like Ray did a solid job, 'cause it was clear those blue bloods were up to no good. The young lady said she wants to host a tea party at their place next time and invite the ladies over. Judging by how happy Yuna is, it sounds like everything went off without a hitch. Theo told her that was a fantastic idea. Suddenly, the main character snapped to attention and told the Archduke she needed to confess something. Turns out she blew a ton of cash, and Theo was dying to know just how big a ton we're talking. The main character paused, trying to figure out the expenses. She hired 2 kitchen assistants for Hans and told them to whip up extra desserts for the staff. "Good job, Yuna," Theo replied. "Spend as much as you want. We've got cash to burn. What's mine is yours, Your Grace." Usually, the heroes just chilled in the room, sipping tea and chatting. Suddenly, the beautiful girl got super curious about Theo's current expression. The man froze the second Yuna shyly admitted she missed him. His heart started pounding, and his cheeks flushed after hearing that. Yuna snapped back to reality. Theo was away on business, and she was just whining about missing him. The main character started shaking her head, trying to get those thoughts out, but accidentally dropped a stone. He hit the floor hard and shattered into pieces right away. Yuna was totally bummed, 'cause she was just about to use that artifact. Suddenly, the orb on the shelf started glowing, and a voice she knew all too well came from it. The main character immediately started apologizing to Theo for cutting off their call so abruptly. Out of the blue, the guy replied that he'd been missing her like crazy too. A small smile instantly crept across Yuna's face. She excitedly blurted out again that she missed him just as much. The next morning, the secretary griped about who even thought to build a temple in the middle of nowhere. But the Archduke himself was clearly buzzing with energy. He even worked out last night. Theo explained that he just felt like he'd lose it and head back to the estate if he didn't blow off some steam. Ulysses was taken aback by those words, but before he could say anything, they were almost at the temple. He should be waiting inside already. The secretary knocked on the door and told High Priest Perkus that some visitors had arrived to see him. The man opened the door and invited both guests inside, saying he'd been expecting them. Things always seem different on the outside than they do on the inside. The High Priest of the Eye of the Storm, Perkus, stated that this was true for most things. He poured them some hazelnut tea, which had amazing properties, warming the body and relieving fatigue. Theo noticed that it tasted just like Yesa tea. The High Priest understood perfectly well that the heroes must have a reason for coming to him. This man had passed on information about Saint Daphne, so the Grand Duke of the North wasn't sure if he could trust him. He asked Perkos if he was there because of the missing holy water from the temple, and got an immediate yes. It was clear now. If the holy water dries up, it means the goddess Daphne is getting weaker. Maybe it's connected to the saint's appearance. The High Priest replied that he wasn't sure, since it all depends on the will of the goddess Daphne. Even though everyone called Perkos the oldest priest from Daphne's temple, he was actually only 25. Theo and Euless couldn't hide the surprise on their faces. The High Priest explained that time flows differently in the Eye of the Storm. When he left that place, he left all the memories of it behind. The Grand Archduke asked sarcastically if he was supposed to buy that, because it sounded like total hogwash. Believe it or not, that's up to you. But it does mean the High Priest isn't all-knowing. If the Saintess uses her power to restore the holy water, will that power just vanish? Perkos couldn't say for sure, but he figured the Saintess herself might disappear too. After the goddess Daphne first showed up, the Saintess vanished. So if another Saintess has appeared now, she'll probably disappear after she completes her mission. But that's just Perkos's guess. The holy texts don't say a word about what happened to the Saintess afterward. The Archduke was really hung up on that disappearing part. If Yuna used her power to restore the holy water and just became a normal person again, that'd be great. Theo was thinking they could finally ditch the Bayo Empire then. The thought of Yuna disappearing made the Archduke clench his fists without even realizing it. The High Priest informed His Grace that this was the absolute best he could do. Perkos was straight up. He doesn't trust the master. The High Priest owed Lady Camilla for her kindness, so he did her grandson a solid. Only now did Theo find out his grandma was friends with Perkos, and that he owed her big time back in the day. His Grace probably already knew, but tons of people keep bugging the High Priest about the saint. Perkos always gave the same answer. The saint's power isn't something ordinary folks should mess with. It's not just a warning, it's a threat. You could guess that Perkos actually thinks the Grand Archduke is hunting the saint's power. But right now, all Theo was thinking about was how the High Priest was indebted to Lady Camilla. The Archduke told his secretary to get in touch with her ASAP and let her know her grandson would visit as soon as he could. Camilla asked the butler when he was coming. The guy said soon, and the woman said the last time she saw her grandson was like 5 years ago. That little rascal is as headstrong as ever. 5 years back, Camilla burst through the door after hearing about her grandson. The guy was sitting there with a bloody bandage on his shoulder, gritting his teeth from the insane pain. Theo lost his arm from the torture, but the priests just reattached it, so he needs to take it easy. Camilla was pissed when her grandson said he was fine and needed to get back out there ASAP. Theo figured he couldn't bail after a fight, not while those sons of guns' defenses were down. They had to move now. Her hand shot up before she even realized it. She slapped him hard across the face. Then she yelled, asking if he'd completely lost it and become the monster everyone said he was. Camilla couldn't wrap her head around what was in the blood of the imperial family. Her son died young, and now her grandson was trying to do the same. Looking back, she knew she was way out of line. This wasn't just about Theo, it was about her own son too. Years back, Camilla found out her son wanted to marry the Grand Duchess Karen Rose. Camilla figured those royals are all about climbing the ladder, and this marriage would only make things harder for her son. Besides, he's already stretched thin as it is. What's he gonna do when he heads north and gets sick? But the blonde guy didn't give a damn about Karen Rose being royalty. It wasn't about moving up in the world or chasing fame. The dude was head over heels for the girl, and that's all that mattered. Fine, whatever. But Camilla was dead set against it. If her son's so desperate to leave, then he can just go. She'd just live like she never had a son in the first place. 10 years later, the madame got a letter from the north. That's when Camilla heard the terrible news. Her hands were shaking as she read the letter, barely holding her emotions in check. The butler offered to get the carriage ready, but she refused. As far as she was concerned, he wasn't her son anymore. If only Camilla had gotten along with Karen Rose back then, Theo might have chosen a different path, instead of war. The butler entered the room and announced that his lordship's carriage had arrived. Soon, Theo walked in, all noble and stuff. Clutching her teacup, the woman asked her only grandson what brought him here. Camilla joked that since Theo had come to see her first, she must have seen it all now. The Archduke announced he was here to make a deal. But first, he asked Camilla to name her price. A magic stone, whatever. It didn't matter. Theo himself wanted Grandma to ask Perkos to help him out. Camilla figured the kid must have heard those stories about the saints too, meaning he might be after the throne. Emperor Bayo had 2 kids, the crown prince, stuck in bed with some incurable disease, and a princess who didn't even get a coming-of-age ceremony. Maybe Theo wants to jump on that chance and snatch the throne, getting his hands on the saint's power. But the Grand Archduke of the North couldn't care less about the throne, or even the saint's power. He wanted to make sure nobody could use that power, not even the saint herself. Camilla was stunned to hear her grandson say that. She had absolutely no clue why he'd want to do something like that. As long as Theo has even a drop of imperial blood in him, Perkos won't believe him for a second. Camilla's word won't be enough. The woman asked Theo to promise he'd help Perkos out. She told him to tell Perkos that the Archduke would stop the imperial family from stealing the saint's power. Camilla didn't know what her grandson was planning, but since he came to her, he was probably at his wits' end. Theo asked the madame what she wanted. Since they were making a deal here, the woman heard her grandson got married, and it seemed to be to some girl from a village on the island. But why doesn't he ditch her and hook up with Princess Ashlyn, who's here for the festival? Camilla heard that the kingdom of Ashlyn invested in processing magic stones and already made a killing. However, Theo flat out refused the suggestion. The hero used to be engaged to a princess, but the king of Ashlyn said there was no way he'd give up his daughter, and even fainted. Camilla decided to ask her grandson if he was getting along with his current wife now. The woman was asking about it because apparently Theo doesn't love her, since he couldn't even be bothered to have a wedding ceremony. The hero remembered that he himself had made that decision. He was too indifferent for Yuna's first marriage. Camilla's face lit up with surprise the moment her only grandson announced they would be having the ceremony. Theo awkwardly explained that they'd just postponed it for a bit. The wedding ceremony would be held after he got back. Then Camilla stated her wish. She wants her grandson to send her a wedding invitation. The Archduke exclaimed he'd rather hand over the magic stones, but the madame already had a ton of those anyway. Theo offered investments in her business, but the woman replied that she already had more money than she knew what to do with. If the great Archduke couldn't grant such a simple wish, then they wouldn't be able to make a deal with each other. The Archduke couldn't argue with that sly old fox, so in the end, he agreed to send her a wedding invitation. Out of the blue, Camilla asked if this was the whole reason he came. The guy glanced out the window at the garden and asked the old lady if those gardens were grown using magic stones. Camilla didn't use magic stones, but these flowers have no scent. That was perfect for the Grand Duke, so he told the madame he'd take a couple of flowers with him, and he'd definitely give them to his wife. He promised he'd bring some. Theo headed for the exit, totally missing the shocked look on the old lady's face after what he said. The main character thanked all the ladies for coming to see her. Yuna put a lot of work into decorating this place for her dear guests, so she hoped they liked it. Emily smiled and started checking everything out. The Grand Duchess seated everyone at a round table. Its main advantage is that everyone's equal there. Emily did mention the trees weren't trimmed perfectly straight, and they need to work on the uniqueness. But the aristocrat loved the idea of using a round table. It gave the feeling they could chat comfortably, and the other ladies agreed with Mrs. Brown, the hostess. Teresa asked Yuna, all flustered, where Ray was. Marie, with a sly grin, said, "Teresa's been going on and on about Ray's lady lately." Trying to change the subject, Emily suggested they name their group, since they'd be seeing each other more often. The main character thought that was a great idea. Marie suggested keeping the name simple, something like tea and cake, because every time they get together, the young noble ladies have tea and cake. Everyone else was into that idea. Out of nowhere, Ray walks up to the main character and tells her that Lady Giselle is here to see her. Madame Brown tensed up, not understanding why Giselle would show up here. After clearing up the confusion, she explained that Yuna is a really good person and not as bad as people say. Turns out, Emily told her dear friend that she was going to the Grand Duchess Yuna's for tea today. Guess Giselle got curious too. The main character was super happy and asked them to bring the guest in. Seeing her dear friend, Emily immediately jumped up and asked with a smile what she was doing there, since she hadn't said a word about it. Giselle replied haughtily that she was just curious about what kind of person the Grand Duchess was. Actually, this is even better. If Giselle sees Yuna with her own eyes, She'll realize that the other day was just a misunderstanding. The Grand Duchess greeted her dear guest, but the madam didn't say anything, just haughtily sat down at the table. Yuna greeted Giselle again, and she finally nodded, deigning to introduce herself. The woman thanked her for the welcome, despite her unexpected visit. The main character replied with a friendly smile that she was always happy to see Emily's friends. Madam asked mockingly what happened to the garden. It looked like a bunch of kids trashed the place. Confusion and indignation appeared on Yuna's face at the same time. Meanwhile, Giselle continued, "It all looks like a complete mess. Trees of different sizes and tasteless colored flowers. How can you use a round table for tea? How will people even know where to sit?" The hostess, Brown, couldn't take it anymore and told her friend that she was going too far. "Right now, Giselle is just nitpicking." Marie exclaimed that she actually wants to buy a table like that for herself. The gardens were amazing too. The ladies told Her Highness not to worry. It'll be even more vibrant when all the flowers bloom. Giselle couldn't believe anyone would dare talk back to her. She figured the Archduchess must have bribed them all. Maybe it had something to do with that mountain of gifts that stuck-up Yuna sent their way. "I heard the Grand Duke went to the Cervan Festival." And, yeah, the main character confirmed it. Everyone knows the Grand Duke doesn't do festivals. So maybe he went there because of Princess Ashlyn. The kingdom of Ashlyn might be small and weak, but its princesses are famous for being total knockouts. Besides, the Grand Duke of the North proposed to Princess Ashlyn once upon a time. They say he even caused a scene demanding her hand in marriage. Emily, annoyed, asked why her friend was bringing that up now. Giselle smirked. "What's the big deal? His Highness is already married to the Grand Duchess, after all. Still, it's kinda weird that he'd go to a festival and leave his wife behind." Mrs. Brown, the hostess, jumped up and, pointing towards the exit, yelled at Giselle to get the hell out of her house right now. The other ladies chimed in, backing her up. Giselle, all fake innocence, asked what the problem was, saying she hadn't said anything out of line. Ray walked over to escort her to the door, but she warned the madam that if she said one more word, she'd be dealing with some serious repercussions later. Giselle felt a shiver run down her spine. She snapped back that she could find her own way out. She was leaving anyway. She was a busy woman after all. The madam left, but Yuna was still feeling uneasy after her visit. Marie gently touched the Grand Duchess's hand and told her not to take that woman's words to heart. The ladies shared that their husbands weren't exactly welcoming at first either, but things changed after a while. Yuna thanked everyone for their kind words and assured them she was fine, saying everyone has a first love. Emily chirped happily that what matters most is the present. The main character asked, flustered, if the princess of the Ashlyn Kingdom was really that beautiful. The ladies immediately exclaimed that the Grand Duchess was way more gorgeous. Her beauty could stop your heart. After sunset, during the festival, Theo took a sip of expensive red wine. The Grand Duke's at the festival for the first time ever. That guy's impossible to get a meeting with. So, the nobles figured this was the perfect chance to snag some investment for their new venture. Euless approached the master and announced the arrival of High Priest Perkos. Just then, someone approached the Grand Duke of the North. So this aristocrat wanted to pitch a business idea, but Theo just straight up booted everyone out. Theo's face went even darker. And seeing that, Euless, with a polite smile, quickly explained to the nobles that the Archduke had urgent business. If it's about investments, they can talk to him about it. While Euless is down south, we gotta find a business that'll pump up the Duke's wealth. That's why he asked everyone who's interested to get in line. The festival's just kicked off, but the big Archduke's already arrived bright and early. Theo told Perkis he didn't drag himself all the way out here to enjoy the festival. The High Priest would never have imagined His Grace would be meeting with Lady Camilla. But if the gentleman wants him to hear his story, the man's gotta promise Perkis something more concrete. Theo thought he'd already made his intentions perfectly clear, but the High Priest wanted to hear more than just words. This had to be a life oath. In other words, Perkos was talking about a vow to the gods. The High Priest placed a rope on the table. Perkos was showing how meticulous he was, so the Grand Archduke suggested they cut to the chase and get started. To make the oath, you have to wrap Daphne's bonds around your wrist, filled with divine power. It's one of the components of the oath, the thing that links the vow to your soul. That's how they become one. You break a god's oath, you pay with your life. Now Theo has to swear to protect the saint, which also means that as the Grand Archduke of the North, he won't harm her. The man resolutely swore that no matter what, he would protect the saint. The shackles instantly glowed with a bright golden light and clamped tightly around Theo's wrists. Turns out, the oath requires blood. so the great Archduke of the North is about to feel a little pinch. Theo could feel the blood flowing slowly, but it was pretty bearable. But then a searing pain erupted in the man's chest, and his voice cracked with a cry of agony. But finally it was over. Theo should feel as if his heart and Yuna's are now linked. That's proof the oath is complete. The Archduke of the North handled that well. Theo figured the high priest must be pretty tough to handle that kind of pain so easily. Perkos replied, "Only the one making the oath feels the pain. I just channeled a little of my divine power." The high priest just didn't understand why his lord was now glaring at him with such malice. Theo suggested we drop it and finally get down to brass tacks. Perkos nodded, agreeing with the Grand Archduke's suggestion. According to the forbidden texts, the saints relay messages from the goddess Daphne, and the saint herself can create holy water. But if the problem was just the holy water, things would be simpler. The holy water didn't just vanish. Perkos already checked that. Someone's probably stealing it. The same thing's happening at the Phoenix and Servan temples. Someone's pilfering the holy water for some messed up reason. After Theo swore the oath, the high priest has no reason to lie. Perkos initially wanted to find whoever's stealing the holy water. He needs to know their motives to protect the saint. Predictably, the Bayon Empire is the prime suspect. Perkos knew the Bayo Empire was desperate to get their hands on the saint's power, and they'd stop at nothing to make it happen. But the fact they need so much holy water suggests it's not just the Bayo Empire involved in this. His Eminence definitely knows who the saint is and how to steal her power. The master traveled all this way south to identify the saint, meaning the Archduke is dead set on her existence. So, His Eminence already knows the Empire's hungry for the saint's power. Only now did Theo realize the high priest was testing him the whole time, and he didn't even catch on. In that case, Perkos must have known who the saint was, but the priest didn't want to jump the gun, because he's being watched every step of the way. So Perkos did something different. He willingly made contact with those who are seeking the saint's power. So, the priest decided to become bait himself, because asking the saint directly would only cause problems. The prophecies always talked about protecting the saint, so why did that one sound like stealing her power? Anyway, anyone who breaks their oath to the god will die, and the Grand Duke of the North better not forget that. Perkos is leaving now, but he warned that Theo might accidentally hear the goddess's voice because of the saint's power inside him. That's why the high priest asked her to bless the world. But all Theo cared about was having Yuna by his side, always smiling. The carriage was headed to its destination. Looking out the window, the Grand Duke of the North figured they'd be going deep into the forest soon. He made sure to use a protective spell, so the flowers will be fine. He'll be switching from the carriage to a horse soon, so he should get some shut-eye. Little Theo called out to his mom with a whimper. He begged her to wake up, because she promised him she'd be back soon. Theo had been protecting the duchy while she was gone, so he pleaded with her to get up so they could go together. This dream always starts the same way. The main character kept falling, over and over, until he was completely spent. Even in his dreams, Theo couldn't protect his mom. Then and now, the great Archduke of the North remains a powerless little nobody. He closed his eyes, and tears immediately started streaming down his face. Suddenly, the main character heard a voice telling him to wake up, that this place wasn't for him. The girl didn't know what to do. The man's body was already so cold. Theo's body was totally unresponsive, so he couldn't even make out who this woman was. Meanwhile, the stranger got closer and promised our main man that his suffering was about to end. Theo instantly felt a wave of warmth. He closed his eyes, feeling this overwhelming urge to just drift off. The hero's eyes snapped open, jolting awake from a deep sleep, and he started gasping for air. He had that nightmare again. The guy immediately wondered about that voice. He'd never heard anything like it before. He glanced over at the flowers and just froze.